The Lifestylist, featuring Mastin Kipp.
I'm Luke Story. For the past 22 years, I've been relentlessly committed to my deepest passion, designing the ultimate lifestyle based on the most powerful principles of spirituality, health, psychology, and personal development. The Lifestylist Podcast is a show dedicated to sharing my discoveries and the experts behind them with you. I've been into all things health and wellness for over 20 years, and I've taken every herb, every supplement. I've tried every practice, even some that I won't even repeat on this show because they're so embarrassing, quite frankly. But I've gone to extreme lengths to be healthy and feel good and be free of any sort of disorders or diseases. I plan to grow old gracefully, and so far, so good. But one thing that I've discovered over the past couple of years, based on a lot of research, experience, and also interviewing over 200 experts in the field of health, is that one of our main problems is exposure to blue and green artificial light at night. It's called junk lighting, and it trashes you. So I don't care how much you exercise, what supplements you take, what vitamins you take. If you're exposing yourself to technology like your phone, computers, street lights, car lights, any artificial lighting at night that is not red or amber color, you're playing yourself. I gotta tell you. And there is a solution to that. It's a company called Blue Blocks, and they make protective eyewear. Now that sounds really geeky. They make really cool, what look like sunglasses at night, but they block blue light. So you can go to blueblocks.com. That's BLUBLOX.com. Enter the code Lifestylist and save 15% off their eyewear. They have different versions too. There's some that you wear during the daytime or on a computer or in early evening, or the really dark ones that block out 100% of the harmful blue light at night. So you've got option there, you've got different frames, and they also do prescription and non-prescription and reading glasses. So they are hooking it up over at blueblocks.com. That's BLUBLOX, blueblocks.com. Check it out. I love me some green juice, and that's why I'm so grateful to be promoting our sponsor, Organifi, and I talk about that a lot because I use that stuff every day. Now, another product I use from Organifi almost every day, but rather at night than in the morning, is the Organifi Gold. This is the Soothe and Recover blend. This stuff tastes delicious, you guys. It's like a golden latte. Now, the core of the Organifi Gold is turmeric. It's an anti-inflammatory spice, and it's one of my favorite herbs in the world. Now, they combine the turmeric with coconut milk, cinnamon, ginger, lemon balm, and even a couple medicinal mushrooms like lion's mane to reduce stress and help you relax and sleep. It's amazing. So I use this as a base for a lot of my very relaxing tonics. So I'll have friends that come over and they're stressed out from the cell towers in LA and the traffic and the 5G and, life. And they're like, dude, hook me up. So I'll set them up with some biohacking technology, some things that relax them. And the elixir I always make is based with the Organifi Gold. Now, I put all kinds of other crazy weird stuff in there too, but this is what makes it taste good and be effective. So you can go hardcore like I do, or you can make a very simple cold or hot drink with Organifi Gold, and you'll be living the dream, whether it's in the morning, middle of the day, or especially at night, which again is when I like to take it. So go to Organifi.com, that's spelled with an I, Organifi.com/Luke, and save 15% off your order of the Organifi Gold or any of their other products using the code Lifestylist. Organifi.com/Luke. The code is Lifestylist. We're back in the saddle again, folks. Today's guest is Mastin Kipp. He's a #1 best-selling author, speaker, and creator of Functional Life Coaching, the only data-driven, trauma-informed coaching modality. And I've got to say, ahead of this conversation, that this was one of the most meaningful, vulnerable, and transformative shows I've ever recorded. Perhaps even one of the most transformative meetings I've ever had with another human being. I was somewhat familiar with Mastin's work, and I knew that I wanted him on the show because I knew that he was the trauma guy. And I'd watched some of his videos here and there, read some of his stuff. Like I had an idea of what he was about, and I'm like, this guy's definitely overqualified to be on the show. He's legit. But when we sat down together, dude, something magical happened. I mean, so many pieces just clicked for me in this conversation. And you'll probably hear it as you listen to it. I'm going, oh, there's things inside my mind, spirit, soul. The dots are being connected. I'm seeing, oh, shit, this is my problem. This is everyone's problem. We were all hurt at some point in our life. And that is manifesting with various types of neuroses, addictions, etc. And then we're running around playing, whack-a-mole, trying to fix these bad habits and ways of coping when we really could just go to the root of it and heal the trauma. And it's interesting that this episode happens to fall when it does, because 2 weeks ago we had Jack Cruz talking about, the insanity of 5G and all these things that are really, wreck our health. Then we had Bruce Lipton last week that's saying you can overcome that with the power of belief and the power of your mind. And then Bruce also talked about how your subconscious dictates 95% of your behavior. So no matter what a great person you want to be and how happy you want to be, that's only 5% of you. And so this all leads into this model of healing the trauma, which is that 95% in your subconscious mind, right? And then next week's episode, actually a couple of episodes, are all about my trip to Rhythmia in Costa Rica, where I did 4 ayahuasca ceremonies for the first time in my life, as someone who's not so much as had a sip of beer in 22 years. So next week's episodes are going to really dovetail nicely here, because what the ayahuasca experience was about for me was healing trauma, healing my heart, healing the harms that I've done myself, that I've done others, and that have been perpetrated upon me by other wackos earlier in life, right? So this conversation is just poignant, and I love the way these shows have I don't want to say it wasn't by design. Of course, I kind of decide which one comes out on which date, etc. But there's just been this chain of events that has been extremely healing for me, and it's, such a joy for me to bring you as the listener along for the ride. So if you missed last week with Bruce Lipton, I recommend that you reverse this and go back and listen to that. Definitely listen to this entire Mastin Kipp conversation. It's just fantastic. He's a brilliant guy. And then you definitely want to tune in next week for, I think there's going to be 2 or 3 episodes documenting the whole ayahuasca experience. Well, not the part when I was actually on the medicine, because I don't think I could work a tape recorder for most of the time. But I did bring my recorder with me and do field reports before and after all of the ceremonies. I was recording on the airplane on the way down there, and it's going to be a fantastic series if you're someone that's curious about plant medicine and using them as actual medicine and not as a party. So you can definitely look forward to next week's episode. And more than anything, I'm just thrilled to deliver this week's show with Mastin Kipp to you. So if you're someone that's been struggling lately in life and you don't know what the trouble might be, and you're trying to meditate, trying to pray, going to 12-step groups, trying everything, and you're finding that the change is not coming fast enough, that the relief is slow in its approach, well, your issue might just be trauma. So let's jump in with Mastin Kipp as he teaches us how to not let our trauma become our drama. Mastin Kipp, welcome to the show, dude.
Thanks, Luke. I'm happy to be here, man. I've been looking forward to this for a while. So thanks for having me.
I have
awesome.
too. Yeah. I'm stoked. I've been devouring a lot of your content recently, as I tend to do before guests come on. And I just relate to your stuff on so many levels. And having your book for a couple days now, admittedly, kind of speed reading it and digesting it as quickly as possible. I'm realizing, though, as I've gotten into your book, and of course we're going to talk about it, that it's not the kind of book you can skim through. You actually need to go through it. It's a program. It's not a book. It's like, It's a personal development kind of, awakening program. So we're going to talk about that. But there's such cool stuff in there. When I was making my notes, I'm going, I think this is going to be a 6-hour interview, because there's like so many touch points that are things that I relate to.
That's awesome.
So I'm super stoked. So what are you most excited about in your life right now, career-wise, personal-wise? Like, what's got you totally fired up right now?
Yeah, I'm jazzed for 2019 because the last 3 or 4 years for me has been this sort of like fog. In about 2015, about a year after I released my first book, I had lost all passion for what I was doing. Like, I had a blog called The Daily Love, and it started in 2007. And at our peak around then, we were doing about 7 million readers a month. And, Oprah was like, I read it every day. And it was like everything that you could imagine success to be. And we had all the influencers that were, blogging and all that jazz.
So how big was your email list?
It was, the biggest is like about 500,000 people. So, it was big.
Crazy.
It was big.
That's crazy. I was looking at mine on Drip yesterday. I'm not going to say publicly what my email list is, but it sucks. By the way, you guys go to lukestory.com/newsletter and join my goddamn list because it's pathetic.
Yeah.
Anyway, I need to get up to 500,000 and find that I'm still not happy.
Yeah,
as you found.
No, it won't happen. But what happened is that I found myself literally getting envious of my friends who were doing personal development work, right? So Brendan or Lewis or Gabby or Marie or Danielle or whoever. And I was like, Mastin, what's that about? So I don't ever make my responses wrong. I always get curious about my responses. I started to realize you've been coaching people and you want to do that. And I was really scared to let go of something. And I decided to kill it because I didn't start it for money or success. I just started it because it was almost like a creative arts therapy. Basically for me to put out what I was going through and talk about it. And then all of a sudden it became a thing. And it's hard to let go of something that Oprah validates. That's really, really difficult. But I did. And then I kind of self-initiated again this curious journey of who am I now? And I don't want to be Tony Robbins. I don't want to be Brendan Burchard. I don't want to be Lewis Howes. I don't want to be Luke Story. Because it's easy to get out there and with social media and start to compare yourself and oh my God, I'm kind of like that, but not really. And I tossed all that aside and basically felt super naked and insignificant. And why the hell did I do that? And started to kind of get really clear on over those 2 or 3 years, what makes me different? What do I love to do? What is it about the type of coaching that I do that's different? Because I was getting comparisons to Tony Robbins and stuff like that. And while it's flattering for the press to say that, I don't ever want to be the next something. I just want to be me. And I never want to be the former something either, because I always want to be something new. And so in the last 12 months, we got really clear on, okay, yeah. So for 10 years, you have over 10,000 hours of doing coaching. It's trauma informed. That's what I talk about. And I thought I had to have a PhD just to say the word trauma for a long time. And I found out that's not the case. And then I decided to talk about that.
Qualification that you've had some trauma?
Well, we can get into it. But bottom line, to help somebody with emotional trauma, the most important thing is to be able to create is emotional safety. And so if you can create emotional safety, that's the most healing thing that you can do for somebody.
Got it.
And there's lots of other hacks and stuff you can get into, but the bottom line is if you don't feel safe, nothing else is going to change. And so then it was, how do I talk about trauma? And we were putting that out last year and testing different things. And about August of last year, I was like, okay, I'm just going to own what I believe, which is that every mental health disorder isn't a disorder. It's a response to trauma and it's mislabeled. And I'm going to just own that because that's what I believe. That's what I've seen. And it's completely wrong. And the American Psychiatric Association is wrong. It's not a disorder and it can be cured and it can be reversed depending on how maladaptive it is. And I went hard on, okay, guys, so it's not PTSD. It's PTSR, post-traumatic stress response, not disorder. It's not an identity. We can change it.
That's good. Can you say that again?
Post-traumatic stress. So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. People get that diagnosis. My father's a veteran in the Vietnam War. He has that diagnosis. And people, when they have a disorder from the DSM, which is where it comes from, they don't just say, oh, I have a disorder. It becomes an identity. So I don't have just a PTSD. It's who I am. And they take it on, and the standard languaging is, and it can't be cured or it can't be fixed. It's just how it is from now on. And the evidence is so clear that that's not the case.
And so you said response.
Response, because what happens is, the thing about the way that healthcare and medicine and mental health, which it shouldn't be called mental health, which we can get into, it's the wrong name, but all healing modalities are moving towards is a massive amount of respect for how the body responds to things, because it's been here longer than we have. Our evolution has been around for millions of years. So if there's a response like stress or diabetes or something like that, there's an underlying dysfunctional pattern, and the response makes sense based on the underlying pattern. And the problem with Western medicine is that it over pathologizes things, meaning it only focuses on what's wrong. And that's not a bad thing. If you have an x-ray because you have something broken, you know it's wrong, but you can't only focus on that. And you can't make that who you are for sure. And that's so easy to do in the current mental health system, is to say, oh, well, you don't understand. I mean, I have general anxiety disorder. So that's just who I am. And they kind of almost get this learned helplessness based on their disorder that they can't change. And that's the standard messaging. And then the psychiatrist just say, here's some medication and suppress stuff and manage your symptoms and good luck, right? And mental health diagnosis is on the rise. All these issues are on the rise. We have significantly polarized country right now and world because we're viewing the problem not in full context. And the data is so clear based on the work of Bessel van der Kolk, Dr. van der Kolk, is that developmental trauma, which is what happens to us as we grow up, and then attachment trauma, which is how we learn to relate to people emotionally and psychologically, disrupts connection. And all these disorders are essentially coping mechanisms. So if you take someone with dissociative identity disorder, or multiple personalities, and you put them together with like 100 other people who have that disorder, they might seem crazy. But you put that person back with their family of origin, they're brilliantly dissociating from the trauma of their environment. And so we have to view it from a different perspective. And so what happened in August was I was like, oh, can I say this? I don't know. And I just said, screw it, I'm going to do it. And all of a sudden, like all these like rebel therapists, rebel practitioners, rebel functional medicine doctors, everyone was like, dude, thank you. Yes. And it's just been this sort of like really encouraging process to be like, okay, I have been onto the right thing and now I'm saying it and I didn't die, so that's okay. And in 2019, it's like we're super clear on that and we know the messaging. And so when I'm super clear on something, I can execute and do cool stuff. And for 3 or 4 years, I haven't been. And so I'm really excited to be able to bring this forward now and kind of hopefully, disrupt that space because it needs disruption. And I can do it outside of licensure because it's not going to come from inside the system. It has to come outside the system. So we're being approached all the time by, psychiatrists, psychologists, Gestalt therapists, attachment therapists, like you name it, about like, dude, like tell me more about this trauma thing. Like I want to come do stuff with you. Bring your stuff into our, rehab center. Like these are the things that are starting to happen. And so for that to sort of really start to scale and get momentum this year is just really exciting and absolutely makes the 3 or 4 years of wandering worth it.
That's
but only in retrospect can I say that.
That's so inspiring on so many levels because just anecdotally, I completely relate with, having different versions of yourself professionally, different things that you've done as we were talking about. And I want to get into a little of that too in a moment. Coming from being in the Hollywood machine and working in the fashion and music industries and all of that, in my own experience, kind of trying to figure out what I am.
Yeah.
Because I'm into all the health and biohacking stuff, but it's like, that's not me. I'm not like a Dave Asprey, Ben Greenfield, like those guys have that shit on lock. It's not really my, forte to be fully that. I'm more into, as we were talking about, my teacher Tage, the Kundalini yoga and meditation and very esoteric sort of spiritual stuff. So it's like, well, what's your message? And I understand not really knowing what it is, especially when you've dabbled in a number of different modalities and been successful in your own life. And in the case of coaching other people using different things, like to finally settle on I'm this. So congratulations on nailing that.
Yeah.
A, and B, having people be responsive to it too. Because you could decide, you know what? I'm an opera singer. You book a gig and people are like, yeah, no, you're not.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's reassuring, and you've got pioneers like you doing this. And it comes to mind a former guest, Kelly Brogan, who I'm assuming
Love
you
her.
know.
I don't know her,
level.
but I'm obsessed.
Right. So, I mean, she's someone, not to discount what you're doing in terms of risk taking, but that's someone inside the system going,
right.
Hey, F you guys, we're all making a mistake, which is so courageous. And I think that gives other people a platform to say, oh, you can talk about this. And that's what's so fun about this new sort of non-mainstream media outlet that we have in podcast and to a degree on YouTube, a little less so lately. But, a guy like you can come out of relative obscurity, start a blog, doing newsletters, and then become a thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of like you defining that thing, refining that thing, zeroing in on what your mission is, what your purpose is, and then if the world responds, you're off and running, which is really exciting. I think that we're in a really interesting point in our culture and history right now. And I'm right there with you on 2019 of like, let's all reinvent ourselves and find out why we're here and unabashedly just go after that thing. So it's inspiring on that level. And then also, I'm just so with you. And that's why I was excited to sit down and talk to you and start to read your book and devour your other appearances and content, because after 22 years now of working on this personality called Luke Story and trying to get my shit together and help other people to do that, I truly believe it all comes down to trauma. Like that's just it. I don't care if it manifests as, what we call a mental illness or an addiction or some other compulsive behavior. We're all just running away from those experiences that we've had that hurt us. And, until we find a way to deal with them that's productive and healthy, we're just going to keep spinning out as a society and individually. So I'm super stoked.
Yeah.
Before we...
And by the way, what you just said, like frame it, postmark it, bookmark it, remember it, because it's everything. It's like if you don't understand Yogi Bhajan, right? So I study with Tej. If you, the Aquarian Sutras, right? So he talks about if you don't understand with compassion, you'll misunderstand the times, right? And this is what he means, right? Because what we're going through isn't about race or religion or creed or sexual orientation. Those are surface level identities, which are important to validate and to validate the experience of people who have not been privileged, who have been marginalized. And the next level is to understand that everybody has trauma, which doesn't excuse behavior, but to change a thing, you have to understand a thing. And it's hard to do what you just said. But if you're not viewing it through that lens, you're going to completely misunderstand the times, like Bhajan said.
Yeah. And it's, it's the paradox. Everyone is innocent. It's forgive them. They know not what they do. It's like even perpetrators of more trauma are only doing that because they're traumatized.
That's right. Which is not an excuse for sure, but it's an explanation. And when you have the explanation, then you can change it.
Yeah.
So, but like, I don't want someone thinking...
without compassion, then there's just, perpetrator and victim model. And there's no end to that loop. There's no way out of that sort of hamster wheel, without compassion and an understanding of zooming out of the big picture and seeing, oh, okay, I can see why this happened. And I just want to say on record, absolutely do I not condone any, any abusive or harmful behavior. I'm someone who's suffered a lot of trauma, and people very close to me have been extremely victimized on a number of different levels. But it doesn't do any good to not be compassionate toward the journey and to, really see that at the core, everyone is innocent and they're doing what they think is right at that given time, even if it has really harmful consequences to other people. So there's so much here to unpack, and I want to do that. But on a more personal level, so I'm excited for you, 2019. You're like, this is what I'm doing. I don't care. People are responding. It's what we need right now. It's what I need right now. You mentioned though earlier that you had moved from LA to Asheville. I always get Ashland, Oregon, and Asheville, North Carolina.
Yeah, they're both cool, but they're on different parts of the country.
Right.
But yeah, they're both cool.
What prompted your move? This is a selfish question because I've been in LA for 30 years, and I'm moving out of this apartment into a house in Laurel Canyon. That's my first step in a couple weeks to wean myself off of the city and the EMFs and all this shit around here. But eventually I think, well, I don't probably need to live in LA once I feel like I'm established professionally and I can move around a little bit. So what prompted your move, and what's it like to leave a city like LA for a smaller town?
Well, so just for context, I've been in LA for 17 years. Okay. So I had like multiple lives here, lots of relationships, lots of friends. Like just yesterday, I was at the 101 Cafe, which I've been to in 5 years. And I ran to a friend of mine. I was like, of course, I still got it, But the reason why we left is my partner, Jenna, wanted to be close to her family, and they're from North Carolina. And I was like, no, I'm not going to the South. I'm not a racist. I'm not into Confederate flags. I don't vote for Donald Trump. I'm not any of that shit.
That's funny. I don't even think of North Carolina as the South. That's funny.
Well, yeah, I just, anything like south of Washington, D.C., is like suspect to me, you know? And then a couple years ago, I did an event in Asheville. I was like, this place is cool. Okay, they got Reiki people and they got Hare Krishnas dancing here. And the cost of living is what, you can get how much for how much. And I was like, okay. And then we decided, okay, we'll try for a year and we'll test it to see do we like it? And basically the answer is yes. And what's interesting is if, you're in Los Angeles, right? We're kind of in Hollywood right now. Hollywood is a different country than Venice and also Los Feliz and Studio City and certainly Santa Barbara. So I see people more or less the same than I did before because no one really ventures outside their little areas here because it's so hard to crossing the 405 is hard. You know what I mean? It's just it's emotionally hard. It's takes a long time. So it's interesting that the amount of time it takes to get from Asheville to LA, is kind of how long it takes to get to Ojai in terms of timing, depending on traffic. So I don't feel that far away. And also with social media, it's not that far away. But the difference is quality of life. And my friends, Gabrielle Bernstein and Chris Carr, they moved away and Chris moved to Woodstock. And I don't know exactly where Gabby moved, but she went out into New York State. And they have these homes. They're away. And I was like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. Because, right now, economics and resources move to where the value is, and that's not necessarily a physical location anymore. And so I still come here to do things like this, and I have friends to maintain and relationships. So I come here regularly, but the quality of life is incredible. And also Tony Hsieh in his book, Delivering Happiness, when he moved Zappos from San Francisco to Vegas, he did that because he wanted to have high-level customer service for Zappos, which is what it's famous for. And the only way he could do that was to be in Vegas because the cost of living and everything was lower. So we could hire better people at lower costs. And Asheville is like a trauma-informed hiring pool, which I didn't realize when we moved there. So like we have this like kick-ass team that's there, and they're all like amazing, and they're not in LA. They're like there, and they moved there because they're kind of moving away from cities like this. And they have an amazing Kundalini yoga community there. There's a studio called Longtime Sun, and they have like yogi tea, and they do the Sunday thing.
No way.
It's all like authentic. It's like in a house, with the mung beans and rice. And the guy who owns it is not like something car Kulsa. Like he just calls himself Bob. And like he has a spiritual name, but he's Bob.
Right.
I'm like, I like that guy because he's not like taking it that seriously, like he does the practice. Right. And when you're in the presence of someone who practices Kundalini yoga, you immediately feel calmer in their presence usually. And that's how I feel when I'm around him, and he's an amazing soul. But the community is really incredible. And we connect through Atlanta, which goes through pretty much anywhere. And so it hasn't been really different because I feel like when I'm here, like when I was in Larchmont, I never went to Venice. So I still go to Venice the same amount.
right. Totally. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it doesn't really feel like I left. If that makes
cool.
any sense.
That's
but the
cool.
EMFs are low. The quality of life is better. The cost of living is lower. The talent pool is much better. So, and if you're not in LA for a purpose, man, this is a brutal town.
Yeah.
So
I'm feeling that. So as I said, it's a personal question. I could have asked you off mic because I'm just like, bro, what's it like? Because I'm poking around and looking at
Asheville like Asheville is what Austin used to be before it became big.
Right.
So it's like the place where like it's like the new place to go.
Right.
Which I love. So don't move there, okay?
Yeah. We'll edit this part out so no one moves and ruins your town.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's funny because I've been hearing about Austin for a few years now, and I finally got out there to record with the guys at On It and all that stuff and Paleo FX, and I was like, this is a cool town. I started poking around at real estate, and I'm like, this is barely cheaper than LA, and you have no mountains and no beach. Or you guys are tripping. Like it's cool, no offense, Austin, but like. If it's not significantly cheaper in real estate wise and cost of living wise, then like why don't you just stay in the outskirts of LA or something?
It is.
It was expensive as hell. They do have the Barton Springs pool though. That was legit.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay, cool. Well, thanks for the update on that, and that's good to know that you can still have a life and do what you do, which is kind of I think similar to where my career is sort of leading me.
As long as you're consistent online and putting out cool stuff, like that's all that matters.
Right. Yes. Okay. Excellent. So let's get into the nitty gritty here. I want to know how you went from being an music industry executive, hard partying, wild living guy into now being this functional life coach. And A and B, what is a functional life coach? Which I'm sure will lead into that. Like, how did this transformation happen for you?
I would say that the bottom line is I moved to Los Angeles immediately after turning 19 because I didn't get into USC the first time I tried. So the second time I was like, my first year in college, I was at the University of Kansas and hating it. Like I wanted to leave Kansas so bad. And so I got into USC when I was 19. And as soon as it was like, I was just gone. And, when we look at like developmental trauma, there's so many people don't understand what emotional trauma is. And also it's not necessarily that scary of a topic. But if you have stress, anxiety, depression, if you get into constant fights in relationships, if you have a hard time regulating your emotional state, if you have a hard time earning or keeping money, if you have a hard time, letting go of relationships, or you avoid relationships like a lot, all those are like symptoms of some type of unhealed or unresolved stuff.
Check.
Yeah, pretty much everybody, right? Everybody.
No, I'm thinking of myself.
Yeah, no, but pretty much everybody. That's like, oh, that's me. So the benefit of doing your trauma work, understanding what trauma is so valuable because it helps resolve those things. Most people think that emotional trauma is like only, physical assault or abuse, which it certainly is, but there's lots of other types of trauma as well. It's very misunderstood at the moment. And so for me growing up, my sort of developmental trauma was my mom had a broken back. I wasn't supposed to be born. The doctor told her not to have a kid because she broke her back when she was 13 riding horses. My father was a veteran in the Vietnam War. He was there for 3 years. as a combat medic in the front line, seeing combat trauma. He saw everything you could imagine, the worst of war, because he was the medic. Lots of death and saved lots of lives. He recently was just with a guy that he saved his life and met his whole family. There was like 17 people or something crazy. They're alive because of him. I was like, wow. Whoa. But, so he has PTSD. My mom had emotional sort of abuse in her childhood. And then they get together and they have me. And then my mom has this broken back because the pregnancy made it worse. And for the first, 12 years of my life, she was bedridden. And so the focus was on taking care of her. And unintentionally, there was emotional neglect towards me, which was not like they're bad parents. It was just, that's what happened. My mom was in a lot of pain. So I got the signal that like my needs don't matter as much as somebody else's needs emotionally. So when I got here, that pattern continued. And, the first girl that like paid attention to me, I was like, oh my, like the first one, like not like, do we have the same values? Is there a future here? Like any of those things. Just like, you're paying attention to me, I'm in, right? Oh, you do cocaine? I'm in, right? Like I'm in, whatever it is, right?
Those are valid pre-qualifiers.
Yeah. You're pretty, you pay attention to me, and you do coke, I'm in, right? Whatever it is. But all of that was because I wanted to keep the relationship there. And I had gotten an internship at a music management company called The Firm, and worked my ass off. I was the first one in, last one out. I moved my way up to being a junior manager there very quickly. We had a lot of high profile clients. So we were working with, at the time, Limp Bizkit, Korn, DiCaprio, Scorsese, Natalie Portman. We launched a clothing brand called Pony that we then sold to the Chinese, I believe. We launched Chris Angel's career. They launched Build-A-Bear. Like so many different things were happening there. They launched a Triple X franchise with Vin Diesel, and I watched all this happen. And the guy that I was next to we were both assistants, like in the bullpen, getting yelled at, making shit happen. He left, and next thing I knew, like he was managing this girl that was like this socialite named Paris Hilton, and I was like, "What are you gonna do with that, man? Like I don't understand." And and he made Paris happen. My friend Jason Moore and I was like, I just saw all this going on. I was like, "This is crazy." Now I had zero context of like misogyny, trauma, any of that. I was just like doing drugs, going like, this is how Hollywood operates essentially. And about 2.5 years into that, got offered my dream job, which was Fred Durst, who was the lead singer of Limp Bizkit, still is, which they're making a comeback, by the way, which I couldn't believe.
Oh, really?
They're like cool again. I was like, that's amazing.
That's a sign that we're getting old when things come back around like that.
Yeah, totally.
I was driving on Hollywood Boulevard up like west of La Brea, which when I moved here, that was like where all the rock, the 80s rockers lived in 89. And I pulled up to a stoplight and I was actually reminiscing just about my early, like kind of hair metal, glam rock days in Hollywood. And I look over and there's a dude like taken in a time machine from 1989, like full on like LA Guns, the Guns N' Roses, just the whole thing. And I was like, oh my God, I'm old. Yeah. That's a fucking thing again.
Yeah.
It was mortifying and kind of nostalgic at the same time.
Totally. You're like, you don't really know.
Yeah, totally.
You don't know. But so anyway, like Fred offered me the role as senior vice president of his record label, and he had an imprint at Geffen. So my title was Senior Vice President of A&R at Geffen Records. And A&R is the people who sign new bands and get to do all that cool stuff. And within about 2 or 3 months, I had lost that job, partially because of my drug use, but mostly because the president at the time, a guy named Jordan Schur, I think looking back was probably intimidated because I came from the management company that worked with a lot of the artists and had a very close relationship with them. And I don't think he liked that. So I think, I've never actually publicly said that. But I think he was probably intimidated by me, and threatened. And so he basically fabricated a lie and told Fred that. And then I got fired. And I've never actually publicly said that. It feels kind of good to say that. And that threw me into this whole like kind of who am I? That was my dream job moment. Went double hard on the coke at that time and the alcohol, and my relationship completely unraveled. And one day I just kind of I was like 2 or 3 weeks into this unraveling because I lived right next door to Geffen Records in Santa Monica still. So I was staring at it every day, and I worked my ass off. And one day I just decided I'm done with this cocaine thing, and I flushed it. And it was kind of a spiritual experience because there's something that felt like it wasn't me. Maybe it was my unconscious. Maybe it was spirit. I don't really know. But it just flushed it. And I made a decision the next day. I want to feel as good off the drugs as I did on the drugs. And basically, if I had to rewind that and make it context for today, I want to learn how to biohack is basically what I was stating at the time. And then that started my whole personal development journey. And the first book I read was 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Oh, nice.
And Covey said, seek to understand before you can be understood.
Right.
And I was like, well, man, I wish I would have known that, like literally 2 months ago. And,
It's also
and then the
in
deep dive.
the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's pretty
That's
much,
right.
if you just follow that prayer, you have a good life. Easier
Basically.
said than done.
Yes.
What I want to know is how much Coke did you flush? Because that is meaningful to
Honestly,
me.
no
Yeah.
one's asked me that question before. 2 8-balls.
Oh, shit, bro. That's a commitment.
Yeah. I was like, get out of here, man. Like, no one's ever asked me that question before. That's funny.
Well, that's more of a commitment. Like when I was a crack smoker in my former life, every night I would go get a new pipe. You know why? Not because my old pipe didn't work. They work just fine. It's a tube of glass.
Yep.
You put a thing called a chore boy inside it, which is like a scrubber you get at the liquor store in the ghetto. Every night I would break the pipe, 6, 8, 9 in the morning. Oh my God, I'm such a loser. I'm never doing this again. And I would shatter the pipe. And then the next night I'd be like, it wasn't that bad. I should probably head down to the gas station where the homeless guys and buy a new pipe,
Totally.
So yeah, but it wasn't much of a commitment. It's like a $3 tube of glass, which is easily replaceable. 2 8-balls of Coke. Now you're on your way to recovery, my friend.
Well, the thing is, I didn't start the addiction. I didn't start out like a cokehead that like dated a girl. Like I dated a girl and then did cocaine to like maintain the relationship. When the relationship was over, like looking back, it didn't really have the same purpose. Now, the one thing I will say about cocaine, which is not an endorsement because it's the worst thing you can do and highly illegal, but it gave me a felt sense of confidence for the first time in my life. And I'd never felt that way before. Now, do not do that shit. There's lots of other ways to get that dopamine. It's dopamine is what it gave me.
Yeah.
Right.
Not to mention it wears off in about
5
20
seconds. Yeah.
It's like you're solving the world's problems. You're like, I'm the fucking man. Do you have any more of that?
Yeah, exactly.
I just morphed into a loser again.
Yeah, totally. Well, cocaine is like funny because like everyone like at the table has the best ideas in the world, but nobody leaves the table. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's like when musicians are high in the studio. You come up with these great songs and great arrangements and performances. And as long as everyone's high, it sounds amazing. But the next day you come back in, you're like, what the fuck? We weren't even in tune.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, that definitely was the case. And I had so that whole like unwinding was very difficult. And then I got on Adderall from my psychiatrist at the time, which was sort of like almost Adderall's like cocaine's methadone, kind of in a lot of ways. And then many years later, I went to the aiming clinics and they told me why that works for me and how my brain, I had 3 traumatic brain injuries and all kinds of stuff.
Whoa. When you got the brain scans at the aiming clinic, did you know that you'd had the brain trauma?
I forgot.
Oh,
I totally forgot. And they were like, oh yeah, so this is the pathways. And of course you would do cocaine and sugar because this is what you need. And so they helped me understand that I was just trying to self-medicate illegally and expensively.
Right.
And now at their recommendation, I'm still on Adderall XR every day. I also take a lot of glutathione intramuscularly to counteract the oxidative stress that gives to the body. It's not cardiotoxic. And I feel like I have my life back. And I have TBIs. So
how often do you do the glutathione?
Every day.
You do?
Like
in
2
the butt
cc's
cheek?
every day. Well, I rotate. So I go like back, front, or like front, back. So I kind of go around. Otherwise, there's like too much local trauma.
Totally.
Well, a funny story on that too. Like I never got educated on how to do an IM. So at first I was doing the lower part of my butt cheek, which is like not where you put it. And it was like hurtful. And there's like sciatic nerves in there.
Yeah, you could hit a nerve.
Yeah. Well, I did a couple of times. Like whatever. And so like I went to go get like a cryo locally here. And I was like, hey, I asked the nurse, could you give me a B12 shot? She's like, sure. So she gives me a shot and she goes, honey, what is going on here? And I was like, oh, that's just my glutathione B12 shot. She's like, honey, it's a little higher up. It's up here. And I was like, so like you want to like make sure you get like medical professionals to help you before you just like biohack.
When I started doing the intramuscle like glute shots, I went on YouTube and I was watching like, and dudes would like take a Sharpie and make a little quadrant, diagram on their butt cheek. Cause I was paranoid of hitting a nerve. And then eventually I nailed it. But I like your hula hoop style where you kind of just go around the midsection so you're not hitting the same spot too many times.
No, I at first I did that. I was like, I think I'm starting to look like a junkie. I need to go like over here. I'll just walk it around. But the TBIs and I have, I think there's like 5 types of ADD that Eamon acknowledges. And I think I have like 3 or 4 of those. There's like legit, but the thing is that the medication, like I view it like prescription supplementation. Cause like if you're going to change your life and like, go to the gym, and you're taking glutamine or whatever to like supplement your muscles or amino acids or whatever, that's not going to lift the weight for you, right? But it can supplement the work. And so that's the way that I view my Adderall prescription and glutathione because it's prescription supplementation. it's not going to help me have purpose. It's not going to help me have interpersonal relationships or feel safe self-disclosing with my girlfriend, right? That's not what it does. It just helps me have a little bit more of my brain pathways working so that I can actually function like a normal human being because I have 3 TBIs and dyslexia and ADHD. So
I'm curious. I know I interrupt a lot. I just so many questions come up.
But you're not interrupting like Gary Vaynerchuk did to Tony Robbins. So that's good. One of my goals in life is to interrupt him more than he interrupted Tony.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Yeah, I hear that. My question is, have you ever tried modafinil?
I haven't. I know Dave talks a lot about that, and I've thought about it. And like when it comes to like stimulants and nootropics and stuff like that, I like to introduce stuff very slowly. And like if I get to a level of homeostasis where I feel pretty good, I may or may not want to introduce something. If I get to a phase where I want to be more productive, like when I go write my next book, that might be a time to do it. And it would be under the supervision of Jay Faber at the Amen Clinics. It would be under the supervision of my functional medicine doctor from IFM. Like it would be like medically supervised because the last thing I want, like biohacking is cool, but it's also like, you could kill yourself because the pathways and contraindications.
Oh, dude, I wouldn't say I've almost killed myself, that being overstating it, but I've definitely had some adverse reactions with my self-experimentation. I asked about modafinil specifically because I've known a few people that have been, according to them, fairly addicted to Adderall and kind of gone down this almost like crystal meth path with it. I've never done it, but I've heard people talk about modafinil being a safer alternative to Adderall, which is why I was curious if you'd ever tried it, because I've not tried the other one. I only know modafinil, and it works for me. If I want to go and like organize my iPhoto from like 2014 to now, and spend 6 hours, modafinil is great for that. If you want to have empathy and relate to people and like have conversations and, be open to a hug, probably not.
Yeah. So my general take on, because the thing about like mental health and or trauma healing and or biohacking is you have to take a personalized approach because everyone has a different microbiome makeup. Everyone has just different epigenetic expressions, different trauma they've been through, environmental things. Like everything's like your genomic pathways are different than mine, right? So it's like what applies for you may or may not work for me and vice versa. With Adderall, I was on it for a period of time and then I went off of it and I said I'd never go back on it. And when I went to get my brain scans at the Amen Clinics, I was talking to Dr. Faber and we tried many different things. We tried Wellbutrin, we tried lots of things, but they were very clear that like blood flow doesn't get to these areas and like chemical intervention's probably a good idea. And so, we got to the point where we said Adderall and I said, no, I'm not doing that shit because the last thing I want to do is like spike up and crash and just have these like peaks and valleys all day long. Like I'm done with that. And Dr. Faber said, well, Mastin, there's a thing now called Adderall XR. Now, this is not an endorsement of it for other people, but this is just my path. I said, what's that? And Adderall XR stands for extended release. So you don't get like all like high and crazy and shit, right? It's just like this. And when I took it the first 3 or 4 days, my nervous system had to adjust to it. But now my feeling isn't like, I don't feel like I get high or like it's a rush. I just feel like I'm me. And so it's a different experience. And awesome. this peak, like, yo, man, we got to do some shit, man. Go, like it's not like that.
That's cool. That's cool to know, man. And I appreciate your perspective because I wasn't expecting it. I think a lot of people in the, sort of biohacking world and people that are really into health view Adderall, they categorize it sort of as like, whoa, that's super dangerous, super hardcore. That's interesting to hear that
it is highly misused.
Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, like college kids use it to, stay up for 3 days.
Every time I fill my prescription, every time the pharmacist looks at me like I am shady. Right. And it's like, and I don't go like, oh my God, why would you judge me? I go, no, I get it, Right. But I have like, I don't know how many people have gone to the Amen Clinics and have like verified brain scans of multiple traumatic brain injuries and 3 forms of ADHD, but that's why I take it. And I also do all the other stuff to reduce the oxidative stress, like glutathione, because I understand what it does that's not good as well. So it's a managed process with my psychiatrist from Amen Clinics and my functional medicine doctor on a monthly basis.
That's cool. Yeah, smart way to do it. And I love that you said that we're all so unique. I mean, I hesitate to ever recommend things in the health realm because what works for me doesn't work for someone else. I mean, even modafinil, like people ask me about it all the time. And I think I even have it linked on my site or have at different points. You have to use Bitcoin and like get it from India. It's kind of funky, but I love it for certain applications, but I always tell people like it comes in 200 milligram tablets. Like I'm like, start with a half of a quarter, you know, and like just see what happens. Because I've had friends that have taken a whole one just right out of the package, and they're like, I felt nothing. And I'm like, what? I would jump off a fucking building if I took a whole modafinil, 200 milligrams. And other people take a quarter and they're like, oh my God, I feel like I shot crystal meth in my jugular, you know? So it's like, it just goes to show with, you know, there's the body and the mind are very sensitive.
Oh, and unique.
And without guidance like what you're doing, I mean, you're kind of, you know, it's a little potentially risky.
Well, and so here's the best productivity hack ever. You want to know what it is?
Get sleep?
Well, yes. But even more than that, like everyone thinks about productivity and hacking, about hacking in the context of like, they're an island, I'm going to do it myself. But literally learning how to ask for help and receive help and not doing it all by yourself
That's great.
is way better than like taking all this drugs to like get more shit done by yourself.
Right.
You know, because I can accomplish far more with a team than I can by myself.
Right. So there's this new smart drug called the delegator.
Yeah. Or teamwork or like
Right.
from a trauma-informed perspective, a lot of people, when they go to be an entrepreneur or, you know, a biohacker or whatever, they got some signal that the world's not going to meet my needs. So I have to take care of stuff. And that's awesome because they're like, I'm empowered, and it can become maladaptive if they're not able to receive help when it's appropriate, you know? And so a lot of people operate as these like islands, and they think that if I just biohack myself enough, I can be the most productive person, do it all by myself. When if you had like 3 or 4 people that you trusted that could like pitch and catch and receive with you, and like you could trust them and they could like implement 80% or 40 or 70% as good as you, and you could like work together and have psychological safety, like that's also kind of a cool biohack too, because we're not built to be islands. We're built to be social creatures, you know? So that's another way that I get more stuff done is by having teamwork, you know, which is, you know, it's hard for an avoidant person like me to like accept help because I'm like, no one's going to help me. No one ever did. But I'm learning that that's not entirely the case, you know?
Awesome. Okay. I want to go and dive into the deep end of the pool here. Okay, so you've got what we might call more acute trauma, right? Say somebody was, you know, beaten as a kid, or they were molested, they were raped, you know, their parents left them on a fucking street corner, hardcore abandonment, adoption, those types of things. And to me, like, it's always made sense that when something like that happens to someone, that there's going to be a reaction where they become, you know, on the worst case scenario, a sociopath or psychotic. At the very least, maybe they do self-harm. They get into addictions, compulsions, and things like that. But having been someone who suffered some pretty hardcore trauma as a kid on multiple levels, my route of self-medicating was just street drugs. Like, boom, street drugs and rock and roll. I was good for a while.
Yeah.
You know, I really was. Like,
you.
I'm always so grateful that I became a drug addict, and people think I'm nuts, but that shit saved me because that was the only intervention that was available. As I got into addiction recovery, what was astonishing to me, and I still don't totally have my head around it, I have a feeling you're going to be able to unpack this a bit for us, but is I have, you know, buddies in recovery that were just as bad of a junkie as I was, and they were like the golden child in the family, and, you know, their parents were there for them and hugged them and loved them and, you know, gave them positive reinforcement, and they went to great schools and they had money and no one molested them, and they didn't have any of the shit happen to them that happened to me or some of my fellows. So as you described your trauma as a kid, which wasn't, you know, intentional by your parents, there was just a dynamic that was created and that manifested as trauma for you. What are some of the other sort of degrees of trauma, and does the severity and the degree really affect the impact that it has on our life and the patterns that we develop later on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let me first define what emotional trauma is.
Cool.
So physical trauma is when you have like a cut, right? You know, cause of death, blunt force trauma, right? That usually means that like you got hit in the head with a bat really hard or something like that. So emotional trauma is actually a disconnection from safety emotionally and psychologically. That's what it is. And so when you think about someone who has been abused, you think about someone who's been in a war and witnessed violence, you think on the surface, and what I thought was that was the trauma, like what happened. And what I've learned after studying a lot of research papers and going really deep into all the experts in the field of trauma is that what's most traumatizing for people isn't this specific event, but what happens afterwards. Meaning, did you hold it in isolation by yourself? Did your peer group or your family put it under the rug and pretend like it never happened? Was there an empathetic witness that could understand what you went through? Was there a secure attachment before? Like, what was your emotional resilience before it happened? Right. And what's so fascinating is that when you get into, working with people who have trauma, which is, by the way, every human. Okay. It's not like there's like these traumatized fuckers over here and then everybody else. Like everybody has trauma. Different things happen to different people. When you look at people who have like post-traumatic growth, as an example, right, versus post-traumatic stress, there's usually, in a post-traumatic growth situation, there's a secure attachment and emotional resilience usually beforehand. After a traumatic experience, there's empathy, connection afterwards, and acceptance afterwards as well, so that there's psychological and emotional safety on both sides of an event. So what's really interesting is that it's not so much what happened to somebody, but how resilient were they going into it, and then how much recovery and connection was there afterwards. So think of it in terms of like if you were at the gym and you're like, all right, I'm going to go bench press 400 pounds and you don't have any muscle and you like, dude, and you just like, you're like, oh, I'm so traumatized, right? And then like nobody cared and nobody noticed that you were there and you're like, oh, and you're like, just like trying to get it off yourself. And then like you never went to the doctor and like your parents like, oh, that's not your chest isn't ripped open. That's fake. That's not real. We don't talk about that in this family. That would be a little bit of a different experience than if you were Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime trying to do a personal record and then you tore a pec and you went to the doctor immediately and then you were able to course correct it, have some recovery, and then get back out there, right? So like it's easy to understand physical muscle because we can see it, but emotional muscle is a thing too. And so it's about how much emotional resilience you have beforehand. And then afterwards, was there an empathetic witness? Were you able to talk about your story? Were you believed? Were you listened to? And one of the things that's often overlooked in the work of Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was in Auschwitz and lost most of his family and talks about logotherapy and his famous line between stimulus and response is a choice, right? People talk about, oh, it's your meaning, make your meaning. It's man's search for meaning. The big part that people overlook is that as messed up as Auschwitz was, which by the way, wasn't even the worst camp out there. There were worse camps than Auschwitz, believe it or not, which I couldn't believe. But what helped people get through Auschwitz wasn't just their meaning, it was that they were together. They weren't isolated. Right. And that's the part that's overlooked because in the personal development space, it's like, I got it. I'm going to love myself. It's all about me and my isolation, my island, right? Because people out there are going to meet my needs.
This also describes why the 12-step movement is largely very effective in treating addictions and
what's effective issues about 12 steps,
like the sense of community.
That's
and support
the most effective part, right?
Empathy,
so Jesus said in the Bible, where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am in their midst. And they talk about the 12 step, the sort of the higher power speaks through the consciousness of the group, right? So like that's what's so healing about it. The 12 steps in and of themselves are important. There is an acknowledgement of trauma in that, and I'm a big believer that affirming that you are an addict when you have acute addiction is a very important step. Afterwards, it's limiting because you're so much more than that. And so the pathways are still there, but you can't just walk around always saying I'm an addict because what you put after I am is very powerful stuff.
Right. It's funny, dude. I just have to touch on this. And it's talking to someone that I relate to so much is difficult as an interviewer because it always just becomes a conversation. But I have to interject at certain points. There's so many touch points. But
go for it. Okay.
I've always, I wouldn't say struggled, but I have pondered that as being someone who has been a bona fide alcoholic. I mean, it's not a limiting belief. I know what happens when I drink alcohol. I end up in fucking jail,
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going to end up, but it gets really gnarly, right? So, of course, when I sobered up at 26, I sought out help and they said, well, the key to you stopping this, Luke, you 26-year-old little punk, is you have to admit that you're an alcoholic. And I was like, I'm in, no problem. I'm Luke, I'm an alcoholic, right? But at a certain point, fast forward 22 years later, it's not like I'm trying to get to the point where I can go have a few beers. I love not drinking. It's not something I desire to ever learn how to control or anything. It's just in this lifetime, I'm done with that. Maybe next lifetime, I'll be a wine connoisseur. We'll see. I'll be a whiskey distiller and I'll live the dream and I won't have a drinking problem. It'll be amazing. I'll do coke on the weekends. But, for now, it is funny sometimes if I identify myself like I'm Luke, I'm an alcoholic. It's like, well, no, I'm not. I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. And is it then reinforcing, this idea that I'm somehow limited, or is it just reinforcing the humility to say, hey, listen, I'm licked. This thing beat me, and keeping me in the awareness of that humility that I've had to accept a certain part of myself, that I react to alcohol differently than a person who is not an alcoholic and doesn't have that disorder, disease, or whatever it is. It's,
the thing when you start,
it's like an NLP thing, kind of.
Yeah, it's context.
It's
right?
tricky. Yeah.
Well, and here's the thing, right? So when you start talking about 12-step and maybe shortcomings of 12-step, it's like a can of worms because it saves so many lives. But if you look at the success rate of 12 steps, depending on the data, because it's anonymous, so you can't get real data, but it's between 5 and 24% successful. Okay, which means like on a A+ scale, it's an F. Now, it's saved millions of lives, and Bill W. is a pioneer, and next to Jesus is probably the most influential person in personal development in terms of how many lives he's impacted and touched to this day. And I have massive respect. And when it came out in the 20s and 30s, there were things that we didn't know, there's a lot we didn't know. I mean, just in the last 20 years, so much we've learned about neuroscience, and since the human genome has been mapped, I mean, we're just learning new stuff all the time, every day. And so it's not that the 12 steps aren't enough or they're broken. It's just if personal development and healing is like a buffet, that's kind of like the butter lettuce. And we need it if we're going to make a salad, but it's not everything. And we're learning new things every day. And so the thing that I think is important is that when it comes to healing is everything's a spectrum in life, right? And so like when you have acute alcoholic behavior where your life is unmanageable, right? It is vital to say, yeah, I'm an alcoholic. But 20, 30 years later, you can say something like, I'm susceptible to addiction. I say I experience addiction from time to time, right? So I am acknowledging it. And those pathways never die. The neural pathways of addiction never die, but you can build new ones, but they atrophy, but they're still there, which is why someone like Philip Seymour Hoffman can be sober for 2 decades and then overdose, right? So you absolutely want to be aware of that. And the identity shift from I am to I experience is very different because you are more than an addict, right? The most important part of a healing process is first to get to a place where if I'm experiencing trauma and now I'm a survivor, which is like an epic journey to survive trauma, right? Addiction. Now I'm an addict. Okay. That's an epic journey to just step 1, right? How many people are so egotistical they can never admit they're powerless, right? So like that's a huge moment and a big step. And you get to the end of the 12 steps and then the goal is to remain conscious contact and then spread the word. And as a survivor, the goal is to help other people hopefully do the same thing. But there's another level. And the next level beyond survivor is, yes, I am a survivor of trauma. And instead of having that be my identity, I'm going to recognize that that's a trauma that I went through and I'm more than that. And it's so scary to let go of that identity. And it shouldn't happen right away. You can't just take someone who has domestic abuse yesterday at the worst day of their life and go, come on, get beyond it. Like, don't be a victim. Like that doesn't work. It's wrong. It's not compassionate. It's not trauma informed. But at some point, being a survivor is an identity that you get certainty from and connection from, but you're more. Who you are at a soul level is so much more than being a survivor of trauma. And it's very hard to let go of that identity for all the reasons that we're discussing. And it's super important because then you can say, you know what? Yes, I'm someone who has survived trauma, but my identity is a soul. My identity is someone who has tremendous value. And what I went through informs who I am today, but it's not who I am today because I've maintained a certain level of healing. And so you want to make sure that that concept is present. You want to make sure that you're vigilant, but not hyper vigilant once you get to a certain level. And that, if Philip Seymour Hoffman had maybe had that, it'd be different because the other problem with only white knuckling is that you're missing the whole purpose of addiction in the first place because addiction is a solution to a problem, right? So when I was addicted to cocaine, I lacked dopamine, right? I lacked all kinds of things that weren't there. So the other thing you have to do is also then start to supplement what's needed and necessary because addiction shouldn't come with all this shame. It's someone who's trying to find a solution to an attachment figure because maybe nobody was there, but this was always there for me. Not like my mom and dad as an example, like this is always here. Alcohol, always there for me. I can count on it, right? So you have to understand that there's actually like underneath like what could be like bad behavior is stuff that starts to make a lot of sense. Like, that actually served me in a sense. And you, like you said, it was the best thing that ever happened to me because there was something that was there for you that you could count on. And at some point it became maladaptive and you wanted to upgrade. So it's a very nuanced conversation. It has to happen at the right time. And the last thing you want to do is take someone who's in acute trauma or addiction and say, don't be a victim. super insensitive. But at some point, you have to realize that you're more than what happened to you. But that's a time and a place where someone gets to decide on their own. That's not something they should do. Someone should force it on somebody.
I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. Having been someone that's, as I said, been sober for a while now, and realizing early on that that was just, say the drinking and the drugs, which when you're in the throes of it, it seems to be that all your problems are a result of your inability to control your drinking and using, right? And so you think, okay, finally I've had it. I admit it, I'm beat. And you have that surrender moment, which is what happened for me. And I'm like, I naively thought if I just got rid of the drugs and alcohol, that I'd be a fucking awesome guy and I'd be happy and everyone would love me. It's like everyone loves me. It's just this behavior that's, and the repercussions and consequences of that behavior that is what's causing all my problems. And then you take that away thinking that's going to be it. And then you're like, oh shit, I'm a fucking train wreck. Without that stuff, it was actually my solution. And that was my experience. It's like, okay, now how do I cope with the trauma that I didn't even know how to contextualize or even identify, of course, at the time. But it's been now, many, many years of unpacking all of those early life experiences and finding other healthy means by which to deal with them, which is why we're having this conversation.
Totally. Yeah.
It's like, well, what really happened to me and what's an alternative way to deal with uncomfortable sensations, feelings, emotions, thoughts that I have as a human being that don't have those kind of consequences. And I think a lot of people that are in recovery, and perhaps why the reported success rate is relatively low, is because there's a misconception that drugs and alcohol are your problem.
Exactly.
And then if you stop that, you're good to go. And that's just not true at all.
Not
That's
the case.
Jacks for openers. Just getting physically sober is the only purpose of that, to me, is to work on sexual sobriety, emotional sobriety, financial sobriety. I mean, just to contextualize it in those terms, right? To look at all of these different other areas of my behavior and the way that I'm interfacing with reality, and to applying those same spiritual principles to all those different areas kind of systematically. And that's what my experience has been, to where it gets to the point that you feel fulfilled, happy, relatively comfortable, so that the idea of like, you know what, maybe I should go drink a bottle of vodka just never sounds like a good idea.
Totally.
Because things never get that bad. There's always, today I was sort of struggling with some thoughts, and I called my meditation teacher, my mentor, Jeff Kober, and I said, hey, these are the thoughts rattling around in my head. What do you think? And he was like, those are your ego, dude. Don't listen to that shit. That is all fake news. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm good. Now, if I didn't have that tool and have a mentor and have a guide like that, then maybe I go, you know what? I should probably just smoke crack. I don't feel very comfortable today,
Yeah.
And one last thing I wanted to sort of add, this is a commentary on the efficacy of the 12-step groups and the movements, because I've studied the history of it a lot, and even pre-history of AA, what, the different modalities and religious approaches that were available, which were largely ineffective. It's interesting if you look at the success statistics. The program used to be much more successful in the beginning. And my theory is that because no one ended up in a program like AA unless they were really, really low bottom. And so the level of surrender generally was much higher if someone walked into a dingy-ass church basement with a bunch of dirty old men in fucking trench coats that were like street alcoholics. You had to be like at the end of the line, where now, people are like, I don't know, maybe I'm having a little too much Chardonnay every couple of weeks. I should go into a rehab, So they're not surrendered. They come in and they don't have the dedication and the fervor to that spiritual way of life that's required for it to work. In my case, I was like so beat down. There was no defiance left in me.
Right.
I walked into rehab and they were like, here's what you fucking do, kid. And I was like, I'm in.
Yep.
You say jump, I say how high. And I've been like that ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's been moments where I took my will back, I guess you could say. But I think that's why it's not effective for some people, because they're just not done. They're still too defiant. Their ego is still too robust.
Yeah.
For them to surrender their life to God, which is what's really required.
It's hard
in most cases to overcome addiction.
Yeah, it's hard. It's the higher power of your own understanding is a really good concept, and I think that the at least when you think of it from the context of trauma, a lot of the ways that like personal development or spiritual material is viewed changes. And what I mean by that is like let's talk about, for example, the thoughts that you mentioned around I'm having these thoughts today, right? and we call our meditation teacher, and our meditation teacher says, hey man, that's fake news. And you want to let those pass, right? So that's a better solution than smoking crack, right? So
Infinitely better,
like
yes.
way better, right?
Yeah.
And the next level is to understand like, hey, why are those thoughts there in the first place? There's a reason and a purpose that they're there. And if you actually trace those thoughts back, like for example, an inner critic thought, right? I'm not enough, I'm a piece of shit, whatever it might be, right? A lot of people say like, ignore your inner critic, right? But that's called dissociation. And so what you want to do is you want to follow it. And you want to say, okay, why do you feel like you're a piece of shit? Well, because yesterday I wanted to smoke crack. I'm just making something up. Okay, well, why was that yesterday? Well, I was kind of feeling alone yesterday. Why were you feeling alone yesterday? Well, because, I don't know, something happened and, there's I don't know, somebody died. I have no idea. Something happened and I'm feeling alone and that's my normal coping. Well, what's so hard about being alone? Well, I'm not used to being alone. Well, what does it feel like to be alone for you? It feels terrifying. Okay, well, why does it feel terrifying? Well, because I had this experience in my past of always being alone and overcoming for me. Well, why did you want somebody to come for you? Well, I want someone to come and acknowledge me because I actually want connection. And you're like, oh, so if you trace it all the way down, like you want connection. Interesting. Well, what kind of connection were you hoping for back then? I just want someone to reach for me, right? Well, what would have to happen for someone to reach for you? Well, I just want them to check in on me or just, I want to acknowledge that I'm feeling this way and have that be okay and not to suppress it. And then all of a sudden you start to realize like these like cravings or these voices have a actual weird, like in a weird way, a purpose to get you back to what you want originally. And it's like an old voice that kind of says, just do it this way, right? So it's like, on the one hand, I have these thoughts that I may be uncomfortable with. But what's interesting is what solved the problem wasn't him telling you it's fake news, probably. It's you actually connecting with him. Like that connection is what probably, I would imagine, I don't know your history too much, but that's probably more healing than the acknowledgement of pushing him away. Because what happens, unfortunately, in the spiritual community far too often is spiritual practice becomes a way to deny trauma and dissociate from trauma. And I know how dissociated somebody is by how much they use the third party or third person languaging. Like we, us, they, like if they only hang, like we are experiencing the equinox vortex and we together are on a mission so that they can this and we can that. And like, it's like, whoa, let's talk about your trauma, right? If you get into second person, like you, maybe a little less dissociated, but when you get into I am feeling this way, it's very different. And so from a trauma-informed perspective, especially like limiting beliefs, like I don't believe in limiting beliefs. That's not really what happens. A limiting belief, think about it, oh, it's a limiting belief. Well, why would you have that in the first place? Well, actually, if I go back in my history enough, that belief kept me alive. It kept me safe. So it's a survival belief. And the next level of abundance for you may not be changing a limiting belief. It might be actually realizing that you can feel safe receiving more, which never happened before. And so it's a reframing of a lot of the sort of common lexicon words and vocabulary that we've used for a long time in spirituality and personal development as a collective to realize every person, every behavior, every thought, all of it has a purpose. And that's my sort of my big belief is that like every diagnosis, every maladaptive thought, all of it has a purpose. And if you can actually, instead of ignoring it, trace it back to where it is coming from and then meet the need, it's very simple. If you're hungry, you can understand the biochemistry of hunger. You can understand what happens to leptin levels and ghrelin levels and insulin levels and blood sugar levels and how long they would last. You can understand hydration processes and, what's the rate of dehydration based on the current environment. And okay, we're gonna have a predictive model of dehydration and ghrelin and hunger, and the dehydration will go faster than the hunger. So here's the model of how long we had, all that stuff. Or if you're like, hey, here's some food. And you're like, oh, I feel so much better, right? So we can spend all this time just sort of like trying to understand a process, which is important. But the fastest way to heal trauma is to trace those thoughts, identify the need that's missing, and then understand how to get those needs met in a way that suits you today. And so I am not fast to pathologize or ignore thoughts that my clients have. It's more about like, hey, how'd that thought serve you and what's the need it's trying to meet? And then if we can help you meet that need, you're going to be good long term because we're going to give your brain and that addiction part of you a better solution. Because if you give someone a better solution, they don't want the old solution anymore. But if you just beat them down and say, well, that's a bad solution and white knuckle it or ignore it, well, that's why they're going to go back. right? Because it's like that was their dependable friend. So it's more about building healthier attachments and understanding what you need. And that's harder to do because those models are emerging, right? So dissociation is good. That's like, I call that like high level coping, right? So low level coping is like heroin and crack, right? High level coping is like Kundalini yoga and kale, but I'm going to put my thoughts over here. And that's a huge improvement. And by the way, I'm talking about myself, okay? The next level is I'm angry at my partner because she's asking me for help. Why? Well, when I was a child, no one ever came, so I don't believe she's actually going to help me. She must have a selfish interest. I don't fucking trust her. My nervous system's trying to keep me defensive. I'm trying to survive here. That never happened to me. Oh my God, I'm freaking. Oh my God, I'm scared to receive help. Well, why is that? Well, I never got it. And then I can say, hey, honey, I know you're offering help right now, but that's terrifying for me. So can you be a little gentler with me and just know that this is terrifying? And no one can do that by themselves. You need a coach and a mentor. But that vulnerability is something that people like, it takes time to get there. So when Brene Brown talks about vulnerability, what she's really talking about is like unwinding those defensive survival patterns, understanding what's underneath it is this vulnerable child who has no clue how to meet their needs or what their needs are, and has no clue how to ask for it in a relationship that's meaningful to them, because that's terrifying. And that's like the work. That's like the deeper work. And it's the hardest work on the planet. We can send somebody to Mars, but we can't do trauma work because people like Elon Musk don't value it, right? Elon Musk says he doesn't talk about his father because there's no value. That's the most valuable thing he could do. Elon, please do not send traumatized people to Mars. We do not need to spread human suffering to another planet. You know?
Also, Elon, please do not put 5G satellites in the fucking atmosphere that are pointed down on humanity. You evil weirdo. Like, I just found that out. I'm like, are you serious? I'm moving out of this neighborhood because of the 5G antennas all over. And they're like, yeah, Elon Musk wants to put them up in the atmosphere and just blanket the whole population with it. I'm like, awesome. Like, can't you use your smarts for something productive? We'll be right back at you after this brief but important announcement. If you are a discerning health enthusiast like myself and you want the best of the best, chances are that you've probably sat there and scratched your head at the health food store trying to figure out which CBD product to buy, right? I mean, this has happened to me on multiple occasions. They all make these claims, it does this, it does that, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone says they're the best. Who is actually the best? What actually works? Well, I found something recently that I'm super stoked about. It's called Onda. Now, Onda offers a patented, truly full spectrum line of products and bulk oil, actually, that's not dependent on the use of alcohol, CO2, or other solvents for extraction. And their CBD is organically grown and produced in the USA. Now, here's the thing when you take a plant that has medicinal qualities like the hemp or the cannabis plant, right? And you start stripping away all of the terpenes and all of the cofactors that make it really a holistic natural medicine, you end up with something close to a pharmaceutical, right? Now, some pharmaceuticals are great in a pinch when everything else has failed. But when it comes to a natural product like CBD oil, you really want the full spectrum of the plant, and you don't want a bunch of junk in there when they got the extraction done, right? In other words, when they get the medicine out of the plant, you don't want to be adding poisons to it. So that's why I'm super stoked on Onda. I've been using it for a couple months, and I got to tell you, I don't have time to go into the benefits, and there's legalities, but this product has been amazing for sleep, anxiety, stress. I'm super into it. How you can get your hands on some is as follows. Go to ondawellness.com. That's ONDA, ondawellness.com. And what's really exciting is that if you use the code Luke15, you'll save 15% off. That's Onda Wellness, and the discount code is Luke15. Go get your CBD on. And now, back to the interview. Why doesn't just going to therapy and talking about your childhood and looking at your wounded inner child and observing those patterns and just talking and getting all those emotions out, pounding pillows with the wiffle bat, like, emoting, getting all that stuff out of your body. That doesn't, I mean, I've done all that stuff. I've been to, on-site in Nashville a couple times. I've done the Hoffman process. I've done all sorts of experiential therapy and all kinds of stuff. Yet I find myself, say, in a relationship, approaching it from in a completely new way, a more conscious way perhaps than before, and find despite going into all that trauma, talking about it, working it out of my body, doing all those things I described, still getting triggered by weird little things and kind of just getting befuddled and like, duh, this feels uncomfortable. It must be their fault.
Yeah.
And it's like, meanwhile, said person is totally innocent, is just being perfect and awesome.
Or are they?
Yeah. And then, the mind has sort of created like these stories. And then what I've found it's hard to sort of build this into a question out of it, but it's like what I've found is the willingness for me and the courage to just stay open-hearted. I think that's like my number one tool I'm really working with right now in my life, is just no matter what, I'm not closing. I don't care how scared I am. I don't care how bad anything hurts. I'm not closing my heart, right? And so if something like triggers me, I can sort of see, and I can trace back, as you were saying, like that. But then the next step is communicating that to the other person, which is terrifying because there's preconceived ideas, or what you said you don't believe in limiting beliefs, but you could, I don't know how else to say it, like the limiting belief, if I expose the mechanism of trauma that I just discovered and the fact that I'm triggered because of that this person is going to abandon me, reject me, hurt me even more, whatever the case may be. And I've been experimenting a bit with that and actually communicating those things and finding these amazing results where it's like, oh my God, these huge breakthroughs. And all I've done is just like refuse to shut down, refuse to believe the thoughts that my mind is having, and just being sort of what feels like suicidal and just going like, you know what I mean? Just like, okay, just go ahead and kill me. Here's what's going on in my heart and in my mind right now. This is what I'm experiencing.
It's such a good question. It's a big question. And by the way, your transparency around that is so beautiful.
Thank you. I mean, it's a 40-part question. I'm trying to digest. I mean, this is real-time stuff. So I'm trying to digest it because I'm committed to my growth.
Yeah.
And I think by processing these things with guests, the feedback I get from the listeners and viewers is like, oh my God, thank you for bringing this up. I relate. I'm going through the same thing. Thank you for your vulnerability.
Yeah.
If it weren't for that, we would shut the recording off and I'd be like, Mastin, bro,
dude,
you gotta help me out. I'm struggling with this issue. So I just kind of put it out there. And it's scary to do that, but I think useful on many levels.
It's all good, man. It's a great question. And I struggle with it myself. You're kind of describing like sort of like kamikaze personal development, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the word I'm looking for. Not suicidal, kamikaze.
Yeah, you're like, I'm going for it, okay. I have an answer for your question that will answer it. I'm just trying to think about how to contextualize it for a layperson's brain. Okay, so the first thing you have to understand is that in mental health practitioners and anyone who loves brain science and worships the brain is focused on the wrong organ, because the brain is a secondary organ, meaning it's like a lot of important stuff happens there. But to understand the answer to my question, you have to understand a little bit of neuroscience, okay? So what we have to understand is there's these two phenomena in the body. One's called affect and the other's called effect. Okay, so affect is basically data from the body to the brain. So you could call it emotional data. You could call it the neurotransmitters that go from the gut microbiome into the brain. And then effect is data from the brain to the body. Okay, so there's this like communication channel. That channel and communication process happens through a part of the anatomy called the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is the highway that connects the body and the mind. It's a very important piece of wiring in the nervous system. And Vegas, not like Las Vegas, because what they say happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. In this case, what happens in Vegas goes everywhere, because this is Vegas, VAGUS, which is the root word of vagabond, which is kind of goes everywhere. So the vagus nerve connects pretty much all the organs in the nervous system of the body. It has two pieces. One that stops, one doesn't stop. It's one continuous piece, but the above diaphragm part of the vagus nerve is myelinated, and what that means is that it regulates heart rate variability. Right, so you have an Oura ring, HRV. That's regulated by it's regulated by, that was on your other finger too recently. It's regulated by the vagus nerve. Your facial expression, right, signals of safety in your face, regulated by the myelinated part of the vagus nerve. Your vocal tone, all regulated by the myelinated part of the vagus nerve. Below the diaphragm is the non-myelinated part of the vagus nerve, and so what happens is that sort of right here is where that kind of stops at the diaphragm. What happens is that this whole amazing piece of anatomy is connected to your gut microbiome. It's connected to all your organs. It's regulating all these things. And what we have now to know is that all of your body is this like threat detecting machine. Okay. So not just your prefrontal cortex and your hippocampus, okay, and your limbic system and your cerebellum, but all the organs in the body are like aware of your environment. Okay. And not just that, the fascia is aware of your environment. Okay. So the neck down is your unconscious mind. Okay. Your body is your unconscious mind. So there's all these decisions that are being made and being sent up the vagus nerve right into the brainstem and the limbic system before you even have a chance to decide. Okay. So because here's the thing, you don't have time in the wild to determine if some shit's a threat or not. You just got to move, right? That's all affect. Okay. And there's 10 times more affect than effect, which means there's 10 times more data coming up from the body than down from the brain. So the brain is like a picture of the body health in a lot of ways. And there's a bidirectional communication that happens. And if your body is dysregulated, your brain's going to be dysregulated. So what does that have to do with your question? Everything. Because the expectation that any human being will not get triggered is unrealistic. Because what happens is...
God damn it, I was hoping it was fixable.
Well, here's how it's fixable, okay? It is fixable.
Okay.
What you have to understand is, let's just talk about a relationship for a second, right? So everybody has a person that they're in a relationship with, or they were, that has a certain tone, that when they make that tone, like, I'm going to walk on eggshells, or things are not good, or there's a facial expression, like there's a certain facial expression. Tone and facial expression are signals of safety or danger, right? So reptiles don't have that. It's a mammalian feature. And so what happens is, in a relationship, something might trigger you before you know your face has been hijacked. So you go from, oh my God, to, and you don't even know it's happened. It's pre-conscious. Your tone changes. And the other person interprets all that with it's called neuroception, the perception of the nervous system. They see your facial expression change and your tone change, and then they get all defensive and they get hijacked, and both people are hijacked before they even know what's happening. And then they're into a fight, and then they're blaming each other. Like, well, your face is this. Well, your face is that. I can't see my face. It's my face. Like all this type of stuff. So the compassion comes in to understand that when neuroception finds a threat that triggers us, it goes right into the limbic system brainstem, right into the hippocampus, and all the functions of the prefrontal cortex get hijacked by the limbic system. And all of a sudden you're in fight or flight. And you got cortisol, you got adrenaline, and your heart rate is up, and all that stuff's starting to happen, right? And so that happens without you making a decision.
I know. That is so, dude, this is so brilliant the way you broke it down, because having done a bit of work, I know that when I'm triggered, it's bullshit.
It's not bullshit though. Here's why though.
Okay.
Because in the past, that signal meant danger. In the past.
Okay.
So we have to honor the body, because here's the thing, the body's response is never bad. It's only adaptive. So the problem is, you can't say, oh my God, I'm triggered because it's a false story and whatever. No. In the past, something like that was dangerous. It was hard and it was scary. And what happens, especially with developmental childhood trauma, is that we only realize that a certain part of our personality is acceptable, and we isolate part of ourselves. And it's like exiled. It's away. So you start to bring that personality forward, like your creative self or your sober self, or a part of you that wants to speak up and take up space and be more confrontational, whatever it might be. Your nervous system will interpret all of that as a threat, not because it's bullshit, but because it used to be really freaking dangerous. And so the acknowledgement and the compassion, talking about compassion, the self-compassion of like, wow, that tone used to mean something, or that facial expression, or that word. A really hard thing for someone to experience who's hard with abandonment is to watch somebody turn away and walk away. That is a disconnection signal. And if you're used to being abandoned and that's like a hard thing for you, like this happens to me. Okay. My girlfriend, love of my life, we've been together almost a decade. Sometimes all she's doing, okay, literally, is going to the kitchen to get a drink and come back. It's not like a fight. It's not a thing. We're like watching The Office or something. Like, it's all good. And my nervous system is like, freaks out. And I'm like, a part of me is like, she's never coming back, because I'm used to someone not coming back for the first 18 years of my life emotionally. So instead of saying that's a false belief, I have compassion for the 2-year-old part of me that never had anyone come back. I go, she's coming back, dude. Right? And if she comes back and my face is like, what the hell? She just go, what's wrong with you? She's like, and a partner should be somewhere where you can go to regulate and calm down. That's what a partner should be. So when you see someone who's activated, you don't go, don't get triggered. You're not doing your meditation right? You go, oh my God, they're in their younger self and they're activated. They not even in control. Okay, my job is to regulate my tone, set signals of safety, face this person, co-regulate with them in a safe way, and help them regulate, right? Because they're triggered. And when you understand this, all of a sudden you have a lot more self-compassion for yourself. And the sort of cosmic irony in relationships is that whatever someone, you have two partners that come together, part of the attraction is like the other person has your missing piece, which means most of the time, not always, but most of the time, their trauma is opposite of yours. So whatever triggers you, for them is like no big deal. And whatever triggers them for you is no big deal. And you almost minimize it in a lot of ways. And then you trigger each other in opposite ways. So the opportunity in a relationship isn't, I can't get triggered. It's like, holy cow, the trigger is my yoga class today. Like, I need to have more emotional flexibility and self-compassion and realize, oh, I have my 5-year-old self coming up right now that's used to people leaving. So I'm not going to minimize it and call it fake news. I'm going to say, all right, man, I feel you. Thank you. Let me tell you something. This is a reparenting process. She's not going anywhere. She's just going to the kitchen to get a drink. You're all good. Breathe through it. It takes 90 seconds to 2 minutes for the energy and the emotion to pass through the body biochemically if it doesn't get re-triggered again, and then to self-regulate again. And the most important piece in relationship, just like in building muscle in the gym, is that's like a micro trauma when you have that disconnection. The recovery, muscle is built when you recover. So you talk to Aubrey Marcus, right? He goes and crushes it with his gorilla kettlebell, right? So he'll rip his muscle apart and he'll have micro trauma. And then when he sleeps, that's when the muscle's built, right? Same for you or me. So the healing, like you're talking about, why do I do all this stuff, Hoffman and stuff, and then it still happens? Because the healing happens in the relationship, not in the seminar. Oh. The seminar makes it possible for you to react differently in the relationship, but the relationship is the gym. The relationship is the seminar, and you can't do it by yourself, which is why the self-love revolution is awesome, but it's incomplete because people want to be islands, not getting triggered, right? Versus like, actually, how good are you at repairing with somebody? And so the process is more about repair. And the faster you can repair in a relationship, that's a sign of a healthy relationship. It's not the expectation that you're not going to get into it. I had a friend of mine. We've never had an argument in 10 years. I'm like, we probably haven't had sex in 10 years either. Right. So it's like, that's like, wow, you've been really good dissociation for a whole decade versus stuff's going to come up and we're going to have some safety in how we repair. And the more that you can understand your partner's context and what triggers them, you don't want to be like, well, you need to work on that. You want to create an environment where it's less triggering, right? You want to notice and be more self-aware of your own process and be less triggering for them, right? So that's the next level. And what I'm talking about is really hard. It's like personal development, interpersonal Olympics. It's like the Navy SEALs of relationships. It's rare air.
Well, it makes perfect sense, and I've experienced a little bit of it lately. I'm learning how to have boundaries and respect anonymity in the context of my show because it's so personal, but you don't want to implicate other people. So I'll just say that I have had experiences recently where things have come up. The process that you just described happens. And then I do the kamikaze unthinkable that goes against every freaking bone in my body, which is to actually disclose what's going on inside and just say, okay, cool. I'm definitely going to get hurt or abandoned or rejected or hated or whatever. Here's me right now as this seeming emotional mess. And it's been very well received and communication has happened and hearts have opened and that connection's back and it's like instantly healed. That particular situation and that triggering just gets unfolded in a way that no yoga class, no calling the mentor, no book, no like Pema Chodron, podcast, whatever, like the regular go-to shit that I would use, or drugs and alcohol, whatever coping mechanism. It's just like, oh, I just actually needed to just be open and honest and real and vulnerable.
About the hard stuff.
Yeah.
That's right.
But communicating it kind of in real time and just going like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm saying this right now. I feel like such a douche and such a loser. This is definitely going to backfire. And then when it doesn't, it's just like, wait, what just happened? Everything's so beautiful now. And there's this breakthrough for me,
And so what you've done is you've talked about a vulnerable part of yourself, which is really hard to do. Okay, it's very hard.
Oh my God,
okay?
It's the worst.
And all of the automatic survival responses in your body where that hasn't been safe to disclose before are giving you their normal biological mammalian response warning of, hey bro, this is going to kill you because it did before. So it's a valid response in a lot of ways. And then the courageous part of you is saying, I'm going to try this anyway because I'm pretty sure I made a good choice in who I'm with. And I'm going to self-disclose, and then it's going to be received with an empathetic witness, and then connection gets to be restored. And that's what healing is. And that's what healing trauma is when in those moments, you're able to connect and heal in relationship. I mean, look, I'm not against personal development stuff. I'm not against it, right? But it's like to apply it, it has to be applied in relationship. So when people say to me, Master, I did my trauma work, I'm like, you didn't do your trauma work. You made a list of your traumas. Trauma work is in relationship where you're like, hey, here's the most terrified part of me. You didn't leave. And then there's another part. It's like, shit, they didn't leave. Now what?
Right.
And that's a whole other issue. And so when two people have those mutually shared contexts between each other, that's a rare air, really sacred relationship. And it's what has to happen more and more because, the standard personal development message is you have to self-regulate. You have to do it on your own. I'm so great. And same thing with mental health, right? Mental health is, the mental health message is self-regulate your emotions or we will medicate you. But that's not how we're built. We're built for connection. The brain is a social organ, right? And so the way we're actually wired is to co-regulate together where we're like, like what you just shared and like create those secure attachments. And when we have those secure attachments in a relationship, then we can self-regulate, right? But without that, it's not going to happen. It's just not possible.
That's so
physiologically
true.
not possible.
That's so true because that sort of self-analysis and unpacking, all of the triggers and the origins of the triggers only gets you to a certain point. It's really true. There's definitely limits to what you can do on your own.
It's the warm up for the work.
Right. Wow, this is so mind-blowing. You see me getting emotional here.
I did see a somatic response, yeah. I wasn't going to push it because we're recording.
It's all good. I'm a basket case on my show all the time, and I love it. It's a very freeing to just let it out. But, I'm going through a real healing process right now of, for the first time, really exploring some of these things that you're talking about, in the context of relationship. And just, I've had so many sort of preconceived ideas. I think a lot of it has to do with just being a man and just stuff you pick up from other men who are misinformed or limited in their perspective and their emotional availability. That it's like, this is the shit you talk about with the homies. You don't ever tell her what's going on in your mind. Like, are you crazy? She'll definitely leave you, know? I mean, that's really like the kind of framework that I'm bringing to the table
because
in many
of the
cases.
History, right? So I have an equation that describes all mental health, all behavior. You want to know what it is?
What?
It's H plus E equals B. Okay. So history plus environment equals behavior. Right? And so you have to take your history into context, your current environment into context, and that will produce a behavior. Right? And so I'll give you a really extreme example. Okay. So Adam Lanza, right, who was the guy who shot up a Sandy Hook school horribly, right? How could he possibly do it? Simple. He had emotional withdrawal from his mother, who was giving her presents to children. And so because he felt so neglected for so long, killed her and the kids that she cared about because he was so defiant and angry. Okay, now that doesn't excuse it. It's horrible, but all of a sudden it creates a different context, right? And then now let's flip over to Harry Potter, okay? If you look at J.K. Rowling's discussions around Harry Potter, the only difference between Harry Potter and Voldemort, he who shan't be named, right, is that Harry had the love of his mother. Voldemort never had a loving mother. There was never that secure attachment that was created, that physical proximity and presence and responsiveness that when I cry out, my needs are going to get met. And the more that someone learns that when I cry out, my needs won't get met, all of these emergent maladaptive properties start to emerge, right? So that's how you get sociopaths and psychological pathology. That's how you start to get, narcissism and all those things, is because it's chronic onset neglect manifested in major defiance and violence. So it's not excusing it, but we have to understand how all this works, which is why I'm hopeful that these things can start to be reversed in a lot of ways. And so when that's happening in a relationship, you have to take your history into account, right? So, and by the way, if you're abusing somebody or hurting them, it's not an excuse. You should go to jail, right? And there's certain values that should be like, it's time for misogyny and racism and xenophobia and all those things to be over. Like those values should die now. And for them to die, we have to understand that both sides have these things. There's history and trauma on both sides. And that doesn't justify it, right? But it helps us understand it. So when you go to a girl and you say, oh my God, if I share this part of myself with her, she'll leave. That's because your history informs you that's true, right? And I'm going to try something different in this context and see what happens. And that's where that leap of faith, making sure you made the right selection, can be very healing.
Right. And I guess that's a way to find out if you made an inappropriate selection, if your potential partner or partner is unable to receive you in that way. And
That's right.
is like, oh yeah, no, I don't, whatever you are, I'm not into it. Then, well, obviously that's an indicator that they're not for you.
That's right.
So,
oh my God, I'll never have a love like that again. Thank God.
Right.
Thank God.
So in a sense, it's actually, and I always, go back to my male logical brain, even though I'm definitely an emotional person, but it's actually, there is no risk in it. The risk is that you're going to find out like, wow, I'm with someone who's just not in the same space as me and is unable to communicate about the things that I find it necessary to communicate about, and isn't at the same place in their life where they're willing to work through these things individually on their own, work through mine, and work through in the context of a relationship. So what great news to find out.
Well, it depends on what part of you we're talking to, right? So we all have so many parts, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm talking to the logical, adult, mature, spiritual, integrated male part of you that's like able to frame it that way, yes. But in the moment, I'm probably talking to the 5-year-old part of you. It's like, believe me.
Of course.
Right? And
Of
so we
course.
have to be able to have a conversation between those two pieces and allow them to integrate. And it's really hard to do, right? But when you can identify, because here's what happens. The nervous system is so tricky. People come to me and try to get into touch with that type of stuff, right? And then we find out like what the 5-year-old believes. Like, oh my God, I believe every time I'm vulnerable that I'll be left. But then the conscious mind interjects, that's ridiculous. That makes no sense. It's because this other thing happens. Well, we can only let one part of you talk at a time, because you'll actually block your growth if you start to access those old beliefs and then let your current consciousness start to kind of de-justify them, versus following them and understanding what do you actually need and letting one voice speak at a time. So you're absolutely right. In reality, there's zero risk. It's more like filtering. It's like a job interview. It's like, oh, definitely not qualified. But there's also a part of you that's like, and me too, that's like, but they're going to leave again. And both have to be tended to. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you get a break.
Right. Because it's like to just try and sort of be the kid whistling in the dark, passing the graveyard and going, no, it's all going to work out fine. Like, it doesn't matter if they leave because they weren't the right one then. I mean, it's like, that's only can happen on an intellectual level, but you still have that core, especially if it's someone that you've been with for a long time and there's that core attachment and you've, pair bonded.
It's very hard.
You can't just talk yourself into thinking that it's a positive outcome when, as you said, your whole nervous system, limbic system is going, no, it's not. You're going to die if they're gone or whatever. I find it really interesting too, what you were saying about how it's not the original trauma, but the reception that we had immediately afterward. And if there was someone holding space for that, and if we were, I forget how you stated it, but I was thinking back to my first, memorable, noticeable trauma as a kid. And it wasn't, when it was happening, it wasn't necessarily scary or, I didn't know that I was being hurt, but I also didn't know how to express it. And so from, 5, 6 years old until 14, I never told a fucking soul.
That's hard. Holding something like that for that long is really hard.
I interviewed a guy named Shaman Durek, and we were, I don't know if it was on his show or my show, we kind of did 2 back-to-backs, but we were talking about this particular abuse, and he gives 0 Fs about what he talks about on the mic. He was like, just went right into it. And I was like, okay, we're going here. And we went into it a bit, and he was sort of framing like the actual experience of the abuse as not necessarily negative, and that the perpetrator wasn't necessarily evil, that it was just an experience between 2 people, and in a sense, like, I forget the way he said it, but almost like a shared intimacy or something like that, right? Sexual abuse is what I'm speaking about. I might as well just cut to the chase. Mm-hmm. And yeah, maybe because it wasn't particularly traumatic, I wasn't beat up, there wasn't violent or anything like that. It was just, on one level, I knew that this is not normal, and I was old enough to know, like, this isn't something people are doing and talking about, so I better just like squelch this. And didn't have an environment or wasn't aware that I had the environment where I could process that and go to my mom or go to my dad and be like, hey, guess what happened with the babysitter last weekend? Kind of weird, huh? There was none of that. It was just like, uh-oh, I'm unworthy, the shame, the secrets, then all of the, hiding other things and all my behavior that started to manifest. And the reaction to that is just so clear for me to see at this point, started being violent and just doing all kinds of crazy, wacky stuff for a kid that age. And that was my reaction to it because I didn't know how to process it. So what you're saying is that it's like, yeah, there's the original trauma, but then there's the trauma from 5 years old to 14 of holding that and not knowing what to do with that and having something so psychologically burdensome that I'm just like trying to juggle that.
Yeah. So I'm going to respond differently than the other person did.
Yeah.
For a moment, because every experience can be viewed from different places. And if you deny the first step, then the rest of them are ineffective. So I wanted to say, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. It's a really hard thing to go through. It's a hard thing to hold by yourself. And it's something that no child should ever go through, ever. Because children are vulnerable and you're coping. And the way that the resilience that you've shown is heroic. And I don't mean that through hyperbole. I mean that because it's fucking true. And I hope you can feel my sincerity. Because it's hard what you did and what happened to you. How does that feel? Saying that.
It feels like, why the fuck am I talking about this on my podcast?
But what's the feeling though? That's a question.
No, I know.
How are you feeling about it?
I'm being playful. No, the feeling is, it feels good. And that's what would have been nice to hear at the time.
Yeah. And here's why. Okay. Because it's fucking true. Right? The problem with a lot of personal development under good guys, like under good intentions, is that it creates what's called trauma denial. And the reason why people have trauma denial is because they think that by acknowledging trauma, they're a victim. Oh, I'm not a victim. I'm fine. Right? And what we have to do is first acknowledge it. And what you experienced is what's called immobilization. Right? So forced immobilization is the worst thing you can do to a human being or any mammal. No mammal wants to be forcibly immobilized. Right? It's the worst thing you can do. It's so traumatizing, especially when you're young and like someone bigger than you that you trust that, I don't know. But then if your parents aren't around or there's not emotional availability, there's also a part that's like, wow, I kind of like that because I'm not alone now because now I'm so isolated. But is love pain? Is pain love? Like, well, God, neglect is so bad. Maybe this is what's good. So there's all this confusion. And I've had lots of trauma survivors that talk to me about their experience as a child, and they acknowledge that on a certain level, there was there was value in the connection because at least they weren't alone, right? So they said, well, I'm not alone and abandoned, so this painful connection is better, which is a strange thing to talk about, but I've had that acknowledged by multiple trauma survivors I've worked with, and the behavior is still unacceptable, and what you went through is still atrocious. And the fact that you had to hold it for 8 years by yourself means that there wasn't just one trauma, there was daily trauma as a result. And the term of the DSM for that is complex trauma, because it's not just what happened, it's the compound effect of what happened too. And so that's a beautiful setup for addiction, because I can't trust other people. So I'm going to trust this thing over here. And so, the alcohol or the drugs, far more trustworthy, because even though I, kind of being a dick or my body, I'm having a hard time waking up or whatever, at least it's not hurting me and immobilizing me, right? So like your process of coping based on your history is intelligent in a lot of ways because there's no one to share it with. And not being able to share it is re-traumatizing every time that it's withheld or sort of swept under the rug or not acknowledged. And denying it and just saying it was an experience, that's like 20 or 30 steps from now. That's not the first step. Oh, just experience. That's trauma denial, right? On a spiritual experience, sure, it was just a thing that happened between two people. But here's the thing. You have a meat sack. I have a meat sack. We have a limbic system. We have a brain. We have all these pathways that we've built. If we wanted to have a spiritual experience, we wouldn't be in this body. So trauma work, spirituality is about sort of having out-of-body experiences. Trauma work is about having in-the-body experiences. And to me, that's how you have the ultimate out-of-the-body experiences. You acknowledge this machine that we're in. It's a meat sack and it makes all kinds of weird decisions sometimes to help us survive. But that's the approach that I think is most healing. And I also want to just say that I think it's tremendously courageous to even be able to acknowledge that, period, let alone in a conversation with someone that basically you just met, right? In a public format too. So, and I know for sure that there are people right now who have not had that experience to be able to acknowledge it, that are getting tremendous value from that. So thank you for that on behalf of them too, because you're the courageous one here. I'm just the one explaining it, but you're the one demonstrating courage right now.
Well, I have a sincere desire to evolve and to understand these things, so I can live my life and not be subject to coping mechanisms with side effects like checking Instagram every 30 seconds or whatever. It's like, I don't do drugs anymore, but it comes out in other ways of, and not that, I've done a lot of work around this stuff, obviously, or I wouldn't be able to even talk about it, but I want to move past it, and I don't want it to color my future experiences and relationships, or at least to color them as little as possible. But as I've been doing this show, it's really interesting. When I did episode number 1, Return of the Jedi, where I, told my story, it's a pretty good hero's journey. I've had a huge arc of experience in my 48 years. And when I did that, I procrastinated that episode for quite a while because it was a monologue and I didn't know how much detail about my life I wanted to get into. There was no fucking way I was going to talk about this stuff. I was nervous about even saying like, oh yeah, I used to do some drugs. I mean, not even like the acute levels of addiction that I experienced. And subsequently in the past 2+ years that I've been doing this podcast and have been a guest on, 80 shows or something at this point, probably. I've sort of like put my toe in the water a little bit further. Like, can I talk about this? And I do it, and the smoke sort of clears and
kamikaze.
Yeah. And all I get is positive feedback, DMs on Instagram, people in my Facebook group, like, oh my God, you talked about this thing. Now I can talk about this thing. And I'm like, okay, here we go. And then there's another one and I go a little bit further and a little bit further. I think Shaman Durek's show is like maybe a little too far for my comfort level, but whatever, it's there.
Well, the thing is that it's not that he's wrong. It's just you have to do it in the right order.
Right.
So he's totally right, but
sense.
It has to happen in the right order. And that's a rather advanced thing that has to happen, but you have to acknowledge it first.
Sure.
And that's the most important thing.
And I've, of course, done a lot of work on this and other, that's only just one thing that was kind of like the low-hanging fruit trauma. There's a lot of other self-inflicted trauma in the years to follow. But I find that no matter how much work there has to be done, or has been done rather, that there's still little nooks and crannies in there because, like you said, there's different levels to observe something. And I don't even think by spiritual bypass, but I have arrived through various awakenings at like, oh, wow, this is just a karmic lesson that was unfolding. And it's something that my soul needed to experience for some reason, and really gotten to that point, and as I said, not in a way of denying what happened or the fact that it needs to be dealt with or any of that. It's just really, really zooming out and seeing that the perpetrator was innocent. I was innocent. We were all innocent. And it was just something in the script of my many lifetimes that was destined to take place. And that I've been able to contextualize that and turn that into a really beautiful life experience as a result.
That's right.
Thank God I became an alcoholic and a heroin addict and, all these things that people would not wish on their worst enemy. I'm grateful for it because I'm the fucking guy sitting here right now because that happened.
Totally.
I might be another awesome version of Luke's story had I had a loving, connected family and no abusers around. Or who knows? Maybe I'd be, even more awesome guy. But I like the person that I am.
Yeah.
And it took that as part of the journey to take me to where I am now.
And
where maybe I can have a conversation like this that benefits thousands and thousands of people.
It's rare air, first and foremost. Okay. So most people don't get that far. And the other thing is, I want to just, because I'm imagining someone who maybe was just considering this episode for the first time. What you're describing is the advanced awareness after a lot of work. You don't start with, well, they're innocent and I'm innocent. Because if you tell someone who's at a very beginning level, it's like,
definitely not.
Screw you, right?
Yeah.
And also it's completely illegal. And so there's multiple layers, right? So it's like talking about like Return of the Jedi, right? So in that movie, was confirmed that Darth Vader is Luke's father, right? And Luke is like, what the hell? You said that he betrayed and murdered my father. And Obi-Wan's like, well, it's true from a certain point of view, right? And Luke's like, a certain point of view, and it's interesting.
You know your shit in Star Wars.
Dude, don't get me started, man. I'm a Star Wars geek. And so the whole idea, though, is that it's all about perspective, right? And so the perspective of someone who, like, the worst day of their life was yesterday, right, with domestic abuse or something, is going to be different than someone who's had some distance from that, who's feeling physically safe, who's had some distance from that, who's done some therapy, who's had some distance from that, that's tapped into a spiritual perspective, who's had some distance from that can realize, oh my God, there's this higher awareness. But that's a process. And so if you talk to someone about that at an early stage, it comes off very cold. But if you talk to someone at the right stage, it's the next leap for them. So I want to make sure that everyone understands that this is a progressive process. It's not something that you just arrive at, okay, cool, everybody's innocent. Because, Larry Nassar, the guy who worked on all the doctor for the U.S. Olympic gymnasts, right? He should be in jail for the rest of his life for what he did, even if he had trauma, right? Because he abused all those women. Absolutely inexcusable, right? Someone who murders somebody, inexcusable. And the care can maybe not be the electric chair, but trauma, but they should go away forever, right? So it's all within certain contexts. And so in the early days, it's a different context. It's like you're a victim, that person's an abuser, and you need that in the moment. But then it's like, you know what, you were victimized and that person was a player in your karmic path. That's true too, but you got to get there. You don't start there. So I'll be very clear about that. And so
I wholeheartedly agree. And many years ago, there's no way I could have even conceptualized that point of view. It has been a lot of work in unpacking that and looking at it from so many different angles. And I mean, so much therapy and so much work around that. And also, 22 plus years worth of meditation and having such things cross my consciousness and having awakenings that were sort of bestowed upon me.
That's right.
Of like, oh, whoa, maybe this is not a bad thing. Whoa, but you, like you said, you can't jump from just admitting it to your therapist for the first time at 14 to like, oh, maybe it's all in a plan.
That's right.
Like that doesn't work.
That's right. And
I agree.
But also to acknowledge it, you are an example of what's possible beyond the identity of a survivor, right? Because you are a survivor.
I don't even think of myself in that way. I just think like, oh, I've had a rich experience in life.
Yeah, but for the people out there who that's the lexicon, like you have survived very traumatizing sexual abuse, and now it's something that happened to you, which is like that's called being a role model, right? But the most important thing in all of this process is to meet people where they are. And where you are in your development is far surpassed. Because most people, just to talk about it, let alone publicly, oh my God, they would never get that far. So you are a role model in that way, and it's amazing to see. It's something amazing to own, and it's a place to get to, but not a place to start. So there's all those things happening all at once. And I'm taking into mind people who are listening at different levels of healing too.
Thank you.
I want to show the beginner and the advanced.
No, thank you for that. I think that's really important because based on the feedback I get when I cover topics like this that are, personal and things that people have a hard time addressing, I do get responses from people at all different levels. So far all positive, but that's really important distinction to make, especially for someone like you whose business it is to help people overcome these things. Oh my God. What a meaningful conversation. Oh. I'm really enjoying this. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. This is awesome.
Thank you so much. I love just going into the real shit. It's like what other there's nothing else to do. To me, this is like, if you're not doing this, you're just fucking around.
Totally.
So I appreciate that you're able to go there and provide such insight. I'm benefiting so much myself.
Dude, awesome. Yeah, this is amazing.
So if trauma and these negative memories then are stored in your amygdala, right? And you, as you described earlier, you have them in your body. And then you mentioned, the way that those are healed is, I guess, getting an understanding of the chain reaction of these experiences that you've had and tracing them back, which is somewhat of a cognitive experience, but that in relationship, you're able to work through them and heal them. In terms of your book, for example, you have, a 40-day program that's outlined where, I've been looking at it. There's all sorts of writing assignments and things like that. is it possible to really undo these things and recover from them where we're not triggered anymore? Or is that asking too much of the human experience?
So I'm going to do something that is maybe a podcast guest no. Okay. But I think it'll be valuable. Okay. So I want to answer your question with a question for you.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Go
Okay.
nuts, dude.
Okay. Because you're the one asking questions around here. So you said, without getting triggered. So what is it about not being triggered that's so important for you?
I don't want to feel uncomfortable.
I see. Okay. So that's a great question, right?
Yeah.
So can I grow without feeling uncomfortable? And the answer is no.
God damn it. You're right. I already know that too.
Right? So it's like, can I go to the gym and grow my muscles without feeling comfortable? No. Right?
Well, you know what it is, Mastin, is like, okay, say I injured my knee in high school playing football or something, right? And it's been nagging me all of these years. And when I try to rock climb and ride bicycles and make love and do all the things I want to do that require a knee, it bothers me. And then I discover PEMF.
Mm-hmm.
I meet some experts. It's like, oh, what? Cartilage? Blah, blah, blah. No problem. Sit on this magnet thing. We'll fix it and it'll never bother you again. I want to do that with my limbic system to where ways in which I've been abused, abandoned, etc., just don't affect me anymore. And I can enter fearlessly into relationships and interactions with people and not have that happen. Just like I could my knee. Like, can we fix the limbic system so I don't go into that trauma loop when I'm triggered?
Yeah. So, okay. So one of the things that, especially when someone has an experience like what you're talking about from 6 on, what happens is, because when you're 6 to 14, right? What is that, like 8 years? So that's like more than half your life at that point of 8 years, right? So there's this thing called neural expectancy. And what that is fancy terminology for the expectations of your nervous system. So when you're immobilized and when you're in that place of fight or flight or, withdrawal and isolation, the neural expectancy is it's going to be like this forever, right? And what happens is we get very pessimistic. And pessimism is a sign that the AAC in the brain is not working well. The AAC is right behind the prefrontal cortex, in front of the hippocampus, if I get my neuroanatomy correct. And basically, that's the part of the brain that can tell this too will pass. Like, this is not temporary. This is not permanent, right? So when you get like learned helplessness, personal, permanent, pervasive, it's always going to be this way. It's never going to change. It's all my fault, right? Forever, right? What happens is I get so depressed or I get so anxious or I get whatever it is. And my feeling is it's going to be forever.
Totally. Yeah.
Right? It's never going to change. Versus the understanding that I'm just having this and it's going to pass, right? So that's why I think this too will pass is so valuable. So instead of saying, I don't ever want to get triggered again, I think it's more about, I want to be more regulated, which is emotionally, which is what you're talking about, so that I don't get as triggered. And I want to remember when I am in that state, which will happen because I'm a human being I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, that I know that my expectancy is not that it's going to last forever. This shit's going to change. I'm not going to be here forever. It might be super uncomfortable, but it has a temporary timeline. And if you look at the pharmacology of all this, if an emotion gets triggered and not re-triggered, so if a thought triggers an emotion and doesn't get re-triggered, 90 seconds is how long it takes for all those chemicals to release and pass through your body, right? So what that means is we're about 90 seconds away from the state that you're talking about at any time if the thought doesn't get re-triggered. But if the thought is, I can't get triggered because I'll stay in it forever, that's going to not be a good setup for long-term emotional self-regulation or co-regulation. Versus, you know what? This is just going to pass and I'm going to be okay. And that starts to get a little bit more of your brain healthy to say, you know what? This is going to pass. And the other thing is, as you talked about the amygdala, right by the amygdala is this part of the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is where context is stored. What does this mean, right? So the answer to that question is in the hippocampus. So the hippocampus also, if it gets traumatized, can stop growing. Right. So not just getting your brain scanned, but like, how big is my hippocampus?
Oh, damn. I need to go to the Amen clinic.
It's a very interesting question. The other thing is we can grow the hippocampus. So you can go to your functional medicine doctor and actually take supplements to grow your hippocampus into a healthier state, which is part of changing context and meaning is getting a better hippocampus. So the idea is instead of saying not being triggered again, is I want to have less of a trigger so I can have more affect regulation or emotional regulation so I can feel better. And I want to remember it's not going to last forever. And if you can say that, then you can get your reps in. Because I'm going to go to the gym and I feel like I have to bench press forever and I'm never going to be able to put this weight down, I'll never go to the gym. But if it's just a set then it's a set, right? Just like in yoga, right? How many times you talk about Tej, right? So her teacher, Gurmukh, is famous for like, you're up there doing Kundalini yoga with Gurmukh and you got your arms in some awful position and you've been here for an hour and you're like, for like an hour and like your shoulders are killing you or you're doing the bear claw or something, right? And you're like this and Gurmukh's up there and she's like, okay, you're almost done. Only 4 hours left, right? And you're like, 4 hours, bitch, like easy for you to say, you know, and you just get all angry, right? And she's up there all smiling and stuff like that. And it's like really uncomfortable because it feels like it's going to last forever. But even in the Kundalini tradition, what do they teach us? They teach us that on the other end of something like that, if you hang with it long enough, it will pass, right? And so the same thing is true emotionally, right? Is that the emotional sensation will pass, but your nervous system feels like it's going to last forever because at one point it did, right? So I don't think it's about not being triggered. It's about having a more comfortable trigger. So it's not quite as big where you go back to, you know, doing drugs, which is clearly where you are, and to realize that when it happens again, this is a momentary process. This isn't going to last forever. And that to me is a little bit more of a pragmatic approach based on the fact that you have a nervous system, right? To really never get triggered again, you would only be spirit.
Right. Yeah, that's like you were saying before. If you're remaining in the spirit realm and you don't become embodied, then yeah, you're not getting triggered, or at least not by anything happening in the body because you don't have one. But since I have what I believe is volunteered to enter into this meat suit and cruise around here and learn the stupid lessons I have to learn on the earth plane, that it's kind of part and parcel. And that I can agree with that because I feel like I have agreed to come here and, have the experience that I'm having. I think it's just like, I have such an aversion to pain that as I start to build more awareness about what's happening around, becoming triggered is the term we're using. It's like, oh yeah, this part of my brain is affecting the nervous system, blah, blah, blah. It's pumping out cortisol and adrenaline. It's almost like it's a relief in one sense to know what's happening. Oh, it's just the nervous system freaking out. But it also sucks because I'm like, but now I want to fix it. Like there has to be a supplement or something I can take when I'm full of adrenaline and cortisol, some breath work, something to just make this stop. I know that it's illogical. It's unnecessary. I'm fine. I can have that experience. And so I guess it really is about learning how to sort of accept that that's part of the human experience. And as you said, knowing that the triggers can be less severe, less of a spike on the graph of pain, and also shorter in duration by just kind of surrendering to the fact that this is what I signed up for.
Yeah. And those things you're talking about, like holotropic breath work, long exhales, right? So long exhales is one of the best way to regulate your body because you can't be stressed out and in fight or flight and exhaling at the same time, right? When you're like, that's kind of what stress looks like. And by the way, if you want to be stressed, so in Kundalini work, right? If your inhale is, let's see if I get this right. If your inhale is shorter than your exhale, okay, you'll create energy or anxiety. If your exhale is longer than your inhale, that activates what's called the vagal brake. The vagal brake helps you get regulated and get your emotion or your system back into sort of parasympathetic, right?
Dope.
So like, go just do some long echoing cars, man.
Right.
Like seriously. Seriously.
Right. That's great. I have that on my Spotify playlist.
Like that's like probably one of the best meditations for like activating the vagal brake. And what's amazing about that too is that like Kundalini yoga should be called vagal nerve yoga because everything that helps regulate the vagal nerve is done in Kundalini yoga, from long exhales to humming, vibration, like mantra. The power of mantra isn't just in the meaning. Like, so if you're going to pronounce the Siddhi Guru Granth Sahib or the Mool Mantra, Ek Onkar Sat Nam Sat Guru Prasad, like all that stuff, right? There's meaning behind it, right? Or Sat Nam, long exhale. But the vibration regulates the vagal nerve, right? So singing, chanting, all those things help regulate the vagal nerve. So Kundalini yoga is a great process for regulation, but if you don't deal with the developmental stuff, it'll keep popping back up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's so interesting because even though I'm a practitioner and a teacher of that particular style of yoga, I mean, teacher I use loosely. I don't teach at a studio, but I could bust some stuff out and have been, ordained as such. But when Yogi Bhajan specifically, and those listening, he's the Indian gentleman that brought this particular practice to the States in the late 60s in Los Angeles. But when he talks about what it's doing physiologically, honestly, I'm in the back of the room going, bullshit. I'm like, how do you know it's doing this to the pituitary and the hypothalamus? All the stuff he talks about in terms of the organ systems that are affected. I'm like, Really, dude? How do you know that that's true? All I know is like I go into class, I'm tweaked, I walk out, I feel amazing. Like
Yep.
the results speak for themselves.
I don't know about the rest of that stuff.
Yeah,
either,
but what you just
the
said,
vagus
I'd
nerve for
not
sure.
heard. That's really fascinating.
Well, every religious practice, data set. Okay. Every religious practice has been around for the most part for thousands of years. They have a huge data set. Okay. They all involve certain things. Okay. Chanting, some type of long exhales, co-regulation where they're together, right? And usually some type of like bowing process as well, or body movement process. Those are all designed, intentionally or not, to regulate the vagus nerve.
Wow.
Okay, so whether or not it's Muhammad or Guru Nanak or Jesus or whoever, right? Like, cool, like have your religion, but we all have a vagus nerve, right? And it needs to be regulated, because if it's not regulated, you're going to be in all kinds of disorder emotionally. And so Kundalini Yoga is probably the best modality, because we have it at all of our events. I have it at all my retreats.
Really?
Oh yeah, everything.
Oh, that's awesome to know.
Yeah, and I don't teach it. I bring in the best teachers.
That's
so I don't
great.
do it myself.
That's great.
But we have it at all of our retreats, all of our live seminars, all that stuff, because the other thing is that you have to be embodied. So if you want to be self-aware, right? Bessel van der Kolk talks about this. It's like, a lot of psychotherapists are like, I don't know if my client is ready for yoga yet. It's like, no, you need to do yoga to get ready for psychotherapy. It's the other way around.
Right.
You need to be self-aware. Because you imagine like you at a Kundalini class and then you go see your therapist, like best idea ever.
Right.
And so that's how we organize our events, is because when you're embodied, you're more self-aware, more ready to be self-aware too.
That's cool.
And more regulated emotionally.
I love that, dude. Yeah, I recently did a workshop. I'm going to do another one at the Venice ROM, but I did one in New York, and I didn't call it a Kundalini yoga class. It's just a workshop called the High Love Experience, and just about really looking at what's blocking us from having the experience of unconditional love for all of reality all the time, which, trauma would be definitely one of those things. But I definitely wanted to integrate the chanting, the breath work, and the music. And it was a really transformative experience. And then I went to Tony Robbins and I was like, that's what this dude's doing.
Which he learned from Guru Singh.
No way.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so funny. Because I'm, obviously the techno, it's like a whole different environment. It's definitely not a chill, like yogic sort of scene in a Tony Robbins event, which was the most challenging part for me, by the way. I'm very finicky about music. And if it involves a techno beat, I'm out. But yeah, it was rough. Tony's like, some of this work's going to be really hard. I'm like, I don't care about the writing assignments and the groups. I'm good. It's like, just please don't turn that music on again.
That's hilarious. But I have one song that he plays that I hate too, so I know what you mean.
Yeah. But I was really watching, how he uses the movement and has the somatic experience as part of really anchoring those things in, and all the breaks he takes. And I was really observing just him as a teacher. He's quite a master at doing that. And it really reminded me of Kundalini Yoga.
Yeah, no, he Guru Singh is a good friend of his. And he sometimes facilitates some of his stuff.
And so I didn't know they were connected.
Yeah, they're totally connected.
I know Guru Singh. He's been on the show too.
Yeah, they're totally connected. And
that's so weird.
And the thing about Tony is he 100% is a master. He's a friend of mine. He's a mentor of mine. And my wish for his work is to be more trauma informed, because what happened at the UPW about a year ago when he had addressed someone who's a part of the Me Too movement.
I was at that one.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's lots of context created beforehand. And all
there
that
was,
stuff, right?
trust me.
Right?
The shit, for the record, the stuff that came out in the news was so edited.
Twisted.
It
Yeah,
was
for sure.
bizarre. I was like, I was in the fucking room.
Right, exactly.
But, that said.
But with the context of like, you don't go up to a woman that you're taller than and get in her face, right? You get lower. Right, it's NLP 101, like proximity, modality, submodality. You want to get lower. You want to lower your tone of voice. And what that taught me, and was a really catalyzing event for my career, is that it's participating in trauma denial, because the NLP protocol, right, neuro-linguistic programming, and the whole human potential movement that was sort of initiated by Werner Erhard has so much good shit in it. It's so good, and the idea that it doesn't matter what happened to you, just change your state now, is so uninformed about how trauma works, right?
Right.
And so I find it fascinating, because when you look at Tony's trauma history, which he's very public about, he talks about how bad of a mother he had emotionally, right? So I guarantee there's developmental trauma that he has not addressed around that relationship that I think was made manifest in that moment in a lot of ways. And I have no idea how he's responded to it or reacted to it since. But the trauma-informed approach to like an environment like that is so important, because you can the difference between me and Tony is that Tony's the world's best at helping people get into a peak state. And I feel like I'm the world's best helping people feel safe to do so. right?
Right.
Which is a different skill set in a lot of ways.
That's funny
Right.
because another thing that was challenging for me at the recent Date with Destiny I went to in Florida was
Best seminar in the world that I've ever attended.
that was great. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would do it again because I feel like I got what I need to get out of it. But aside from some of the music just not really being my vibe, a lot of the peak state stuff was very difficult for me because I'm kind of chill.
Sure.
I'm an extrovert, but I'm not loud. I don't really scream, like being all hyped. I'm not into sports. I'm not like a huge gym guy. I'm just not that guy that like spazzes out. So that was actually really hard for me.
But the Brazilians, man, are they the best at that event?
Totally.
The Brazilians are the best at Date with Destiny.
Totally, yeah. And also the dancing. I don't enjoy dancing. I'm never inspired to do it, especially if it's not music that I don't like. And so when you have to get up and change your state and dance and stuff, that was kind of traumatizing to me. And part of it, was because what you said, like you get people ready to do that. It brought up all my shit, all my insecurities and about looking like an idiot and like there's people watching me and they're going to put me on the Jumbotron and
with a weird face.
Like all that stuff. And I'm like, really? I'm embarrassed now. I'm in a room full of 4,000 people just losing their shit. Like no one's looking at you, Luke, but it brought up that self-consciousness and things like that.
Well, and again, it's not, see, the thing is, I'm not against anybody. Like I have so much respect for Tony. But personal development, spirituality, mental health, it is a buffet. So his section of the buffet is required, necessary. He's a living master at what he does. To be able to watch him facilitate is a gift, right? And there's more, right?
Yeah.
And so, if I were with Tony, I haven't talked to Tony in probably a couple of years, but I would love to get into it with him about his developmental relationship with his mother and how that may have played out in that situation and like what his relationship with women is like, in terms of like safety and all that type of stuff. And what would acknowledging trauma be like for him? And has he done that work? I have no idea what happens behind the scenes, but that was a very public experience. And in the context of the Me Too movement and environment that we're in now, it's really important for personal development and spirituality to upgrade and to understand trauma and to be able to understand what is it like to be marginalized? What is it like to have another sex that's dominant, that is objectifying you? Like those are important contexts for people like us who have white privilege to be able to acknowledge and go, and white male privilege, there is this other perspective. And acknowledging it doesn't make me a victim. Acknowledging it is very courageous. Once I've acknowledged it, then I need to change my state and move forward. But without acknowledging it, we can't go anywhere. So I think it's a new conversation and a new layer of context for the personal development world that it really needs to consider. And my personal goal is in the next 5 to 10 years that if a modality isn't trauma informed, it's extinct. Because it doesn't take into the full context of things that you're describing. It's not that it's bad, it's just not complete. Just like software gets upgraded, modalities have to get upgraded too.
Yeah. Well, as going, circling back to what we talked about in the beginning, I think just about every emotional, psychological ailment that has befuddled mankind is a result of trauma. There's no one I know that hasn't had it. It's just a matter of how they've reacted to it. And some people, as you said, have had more support in the wake of trauma than others. And now what I'm seeing based on this conversation is those of us that lacked the support and understanding in the wake of our trauma have been re-traumatized, by holding that for the period afterward, which is a really, really interesting thing to contemplate and to understand. And that explains a lot of why, I've seen people, my peers, friends, et cetera, loved ones that have had varying degrees of trauma, why it affects so many people so differently. I see some people they seem unscathed by horrific things they've been through. And some people, just whatever, a kid stole their lunch one day and they're like, just ruined their life.
That's right.
It's so funny how that is. And I want to run one concept by you. And that is, it's something that I've repeated a lot just based on the observation I just described. And for some reason, I just quote this Bob Marley lyric that says, every man's burden is the heaviest. And it's like, do you think that each one of us kind of experience whatever trauma we experienced? Like, say, some kid stole my lunch at school and that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And some kid broke your nose in school. Would our trauma subjectively be equal? Taking out of the fact of however we were cared for afterward and all the rest of that.
Yeah, the brain is a good question. So this happens. It's interesting how the Western competitive mindset shows up in my work with my clients.
I'm more traumatized than him, bro.
Oh man. Like they want to like either like compete for like who's most traumatized, or like, oh, well, that never happened to me. So what I went through is insignificant. And the real truth is the brain interprets pain the same. So pain is pain is pain. So no one's trauma is more or less significant than somebody else's. What you went through is what you went through. And if you were traumatized, had pain because of it, that's what is, right? So it doesn't matter what the context is, right? Because, at a certain point, if you have enough neglect, just someone, I don't know, saying hi could set you off, right? I have no idea, right? So it's really hard to put it on a scale and say, well, this trauma is more severe than that trauma. That said, I mean, Holocaust is pretty fucking bad. Rape, horrible. Things like that are atrocious. And what's fascinating when you get into talking to survivors is that everyone has a unique response to what happened to them based on the things that we're talking about. So it's totally contextualized based on the individual's unique makeup. So there is no one way, and each person has to have their own approach in terms of like how you work with them, because what's traumatizing for one person, for somebody else may not be, right? So it's completely 100% subjective.
Right. That's the sense I get. I guess that then would support my adoption of Bob Marley's lyric. Every person, every man, every woman's burden is the heaviest to them.
That's right.
Like my trauma hurts me just as much as your trauma hurts you, even though comparatively, if we put them on a blackboard, yours looks worse than mine.
That's right. And when Gary Vaynerchuk says stuff like, your parents went through the Great Depression and a world war, and you're worried about Instagram, he's also right. There has to be certain context.
Right, okay.
You know what I mean? So there's also, but suicide is high with children, right? Because there's so much isolation happening. So the other thing is that he's also not right, because in a lot of ways, they went through the Great Depression and the World War, but there was a lot more face-to-face interaction. There was a lot more co-regulation happening back then, a lot more community happening back then. And now there's so much isolation because of social media that, like we're raising people who are not as resilient because there's more disconnection. It's not Gen Y or Gen Z or whatever, that they're just, these like snowflakes or whatever. They're literally not connected, and they're literally more susceptible as a result. So even though our grandparents or great parents went through the Great Depression or World War, which is horrible, awful, major traumatizing world event, nuclear bombs being annihilated, millions of people, all that stuff is horrible. There was also more social connection happening. So, the reason why you're seeing teen suicide rates increasing is because of all the disconnection and isolation. So, there's a part of what Gary does that I love, but I wish I could grab him and go, hey man, so let's talk about this, because it's also important to understand that, because you're sort of reinforcing a stigma, in a lot of ways. And it's not bad. It's just, there's more to it than just like, oh, fuck the people who don't believe in you and move on.
Right. I love it, dude. Well, when you talk about your coaching, and I have a sense at some point, did you do one-on-one coaching with people, and now you're just doing these events, workshops, retreats? Like if people want to come learn more about what you do and experience your healing, like how do you interface with people other than putting a book out and going on a podcast?
Well, this is great. And the book is a really great thing to do with if you have like a trauma-informed therapist or someone, like it's a really great companion for a 12-step process. Like this is really good work to do. But in terms of how we coach with people, we have online courses, we have seminars, all that stuff can be found at mastinkipp.com. And the way that I work is we'd like to work with typically longer term experiences. So we'll do 4 or 5 day seminars that will give people so much information, but then we usually offer about a year-long coaching program. It's called ProsperX. Inside that program, there's one-on-one coaching, and all of our coaches are like licensed therapists too. They're trauma-informed, they're functional medicine certified. So they're like total badasses. Like our customer service people have masters in counseling and psychology, 10 years of history in trauma therapy and stuff like that. So like building a team to support this work has been very interesting. But when you come work with me, it's not just me, it's like the whole team in a lot of ways. I work with people who are, they want to be like the special forces of personal development, right? So they don't want to just do like a mantra and a meditation, which is nothing wrong with that. But if you want to like go into it and like resolve some shit, like that's what we do. And so, that's all at mastinkipp.com. And we have different programs and experiences throughout the year where people can join us.
That's dope. I want to do it. After the Tony Robbins thing, I was like, okay, cool. I think I'm done with this kind of stuff. I'm good. I was like, okay, there's another level. This weekend, I'm going to a place in Costa Rica called Rhythmia.
I've heard of that place. That's cool.
and
that's awesome.
about to do some crazy shit down there. So
Nice. Pura vida.
It never ends, you know?
Yeah, it never ends.
So yeah, that's great. I'd love to, send some of our listeners to experience what you and your team do. It sounds
That's
great.
cool. And the first place is probably claimyourpowerbook.com because there I also put together a totally free 40-day coaching process. So
Cool.
I literally like coach someone through, because the people at Shelf Help, right? They buy the book, they don't read it.
Sure.
So even if you don't read the book, the daily videos that are totally free kind of give you the most important stuff for each day too.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
it's like
what
totally
a great
free.
idea. That's a great idea because you're so right. I mean, I have a shelf full of books in there and I read a couple chapters. Oh, this is great. Yeah, It's like even one recently I read Jen Sincero's book, You're a Badass at Making Money. I love her. I love that book. And I got the audiobook and then I got the written book. Because at first I'm listening to the audiobook and she's like, now write down, when you learned, that money was evil, blah, blah, whatever. Looking at those subconscious blocks. And I was like, yeah, when I get home, man, I'm going to write all this down. I get home, like, I ain't writing shit. The tape's in the car still or whatever.
Yeah.
Tape. What am I in the 80s? We don't have tapes
I know
anymore.
what you meant.
And then so I was like, all right, I need to get the actual book. Then I read the book and I'm like, yeah, well, that's great. I should go write that stuff down. But right now I got to go make a coffee, and I still never did it. So
that's why we do our live events too, by the way.
Yeah.
So because
Smart.
people, even online courses, they take them and we deliver as much value and connection as we can. That's why we do our 4-day events, like come and get this stuff done. Because I'm a big believer, like don't like hide the level 2 stuff for like the upsell or whatever. Like just give away all the information, and what we really sell or what we offer is more implementation support than anything else, because that's the hard part, is the implementation part.
Yeah.
The data, all the information's out there, but getting stuff done, that's the hard part, and you can't do it by yourself.
Very much so. Yeah.
So yeah, I feel I do that too.
That's cool. Well, I just appreciate your perspective and the work you're doing. It's amazing, dude.
This has been a great conversation. Your questions are amazing too. So the quality of the conversation is based on you and your questions, and so you rocked it.
Thanks, dude. Well, I think the thing is, my secret to success, since you claimed the success, not I, the humble one, is that I'm really passionate about the questions that I'm asking. Like I'm deeply curious about the way the human experience is supposed to go, or not supposed to go, but the way that it can go if you want fulfillment and happiness, and if you want to make a contribution. So yeah, I'm stoked. My closing question for you, my friend, is just when I think I've learned everything, I sit down with someone like you and I'm like exploding brain emoji, learning so much. Who have been 3 teachers or teachings that have influenced you in your work that you might send our listeners to go check out?
Okay. So I'm going to say 1 and then 3.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, go nuts.
So the guy who got me into this is Tony. And I have total respect and love for him. And he is a living master, and his interventions are amazing. Like I would not be sitting here today without his work, without Date with Destiny. Date with Destiny is the best seminar I have ever attended as a student. It is a incredible experience. Okay. Now in trauma, I would say there's probably 3. I mean, there's more than 3, but if I had to point people towards 3 people, it would be Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, which is a vital book in understanding trauma 101. Another gentleman named Stephen Porges, and he is out of UNC Chapel Hill School of Medicine, Psychiatry, and also the Kinsey Institute. And he's the author of a emerging science called polyvagal theory. And a lot of stuff I'm talking about the vagus nerve came out of polyvagal theory. I think Dave Asprey actually had him on his podcast. That's a great place to start, Polyvagal 101. He has a book out called Clinical Applications of Polyvagal Theory, which is like all the science. And then there's like Polyvagal Theory for Therapists, which is a little bit more layperson. That's a great place to start as well in terms of understanding polyvagal theory, because if you don't understand polyvagal theory, you're missing the most important part of the whole thing. You understand the microbiome, you understand the brain, you understand heart rate variability, but it's the vagus nerve that makes all that stuff connected. So it's kind of like understanding San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and LA, but not understanding that there's a highway between the two and how that highway works or how the planes get there. So the Stephen Porges' work in polyvagal theory is incredible. Bessel van der Kolk's work around developmental trauma is huge. And then the last third is 2 people. So I'm sorry for that. One would be Sue Johnson, who is sort of carrying the torch around attachment theory. And she just wrote a book called Attachment Theory.
Wait, is this the Hold Me Tight?
Yeah, Hold Me Tight. Yeah.
Oh my God, I love her. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts with her because I have that book, and I was like,
she's a dear friend of mine. So if you want an introduction, I can do that.
I want to interview her. It's funny because I was going to mention her when we were talking about just unabashedly the kamikaze mission of like, hey, sweetie, that I'm in a relationship with. here's the fucking wacky stuff going on inside of me right now. That's her shit.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great.
Yeah, and so that's why I say that's creating that secure attachment.
Yes.
Which is what she's all about, right? ARE, attentive, responsive, engaged, in proximity. So, so Sue Johnson's work, she has a brand new book out actually called Attachment Theory and Practice. And the basic idea is that if psychotherapy doesn't adapt attachment theory, it's going to go extinct. And it's kind of like Attachment Theory 101 for lay people can understand it too. So that's an amazing book. And then Dr. Ellen Bader, ELLYN BADER, and she is the world's best relationship expert. Best. So like I have respect for Harville Hendricks. I have respect for John Gottman. I have a respect for Esther Perel. All their work is amazing. And Ellen is because she's like so good at practicing and hasn't really done a lot of marketing. She's like this undiscovered gem. And she is the best in the world at relationships, especially entrepreneurial relationships and differentiation in terms of how can I be you or I be me and you be you. And then we're different together. Like, how do we do that? And she has a book called, I think it's called Tell Me No Lies, which is, again, not the best book title, but it's the best book on relationships I've ever read.
I mean, let's face it, Hold Me Tight would be off-putting to a certain demographic.
That's true.
Too,
like, dude, especially if you're avoidant, like, no way. No, get away from me.
The sexual anorexic does not want to read Hold Me Tight.
No way.
Yeah.
No way. But yeah, so Sue Johnson, Ellen Bader, Bessel, Porges, those are some really incredible.
Dude, those sound amazing. And I've never heard of any of them other than Sue Johnson. So that's
like a rabbit hole.
Dude, that's amazing. No, that's going to be great for our show notes. To get the show notes emailed to you guys, go to lukestory.com/newsletter. Or you can just text the word lifestylist to 44222. And you won't get this one with Mastin Kipp because obviously that newsletter already went out this morning when this would have been published. I'm speaking
That was good time travel right
in
there.
many time frames right now. But you will get next week's show and everyone to follow. And, we go to great lengths to put all of these resources in the show notes, of course, so that you'll get on my weak-ass newsletter list. I mean,
that's the call to action, by the way. Sign up for his newsletter, guys. For God's
call
sake.
to action.
Come on,
you
now.
told me you had 500,000 on your newsletter. I'm like, yeah, okay, I got work to do.
By the way, when I transferred to me, they almost all left.
Are you serious?
Yeah, talk about abandonment, right?
Wow, everyone unsubscribed when you were like, oh, I'm not this
I don't
thing
like
anymore?
this new thing you're doing, Master. I'm like, oh.
Wow. And look at you now, man. Look at you now. Got your own stadiums and workshops and all this stuff. Well, listen, man, thank you so much for, your generosity of time too. Some people come in and they're like, okay, I've got an hour and I got to leave. And you said you didn't have a heart out and here we go, a couple hours in. And
yeah.
I just think this is what it takes. And I don't know, conversations this meaningful and hopefully impactful, they require a couple hours to get it done, man. There's just too much to cover. So thank you for...
Well, and the thing is, like, I guarantee this one probably opens up lots more questions. So it's like, kind of like, this is like, it's dangerous because it's like now there's a rabbit hole to go down, right? Because it's kind of like just the intro to trauma, but there's so much more you get into too.
Oh my God. I mean, just based on the recommendations you just gave, I'm like, whoa, there's other whole works on this stuff too.
Oh
Jesus.
man. There's like the one thing that Bessel taught me is that the research that we wish we could do about trauma has probably already been done. It's just in a vault somewhere because those people are researchers and they don't know how to market. Right. So a lot of the research has been done. So like Bessel van der Kolk and all of his work, his trauma conference, like that is where it's at in terms of all those conversations, because that's where everyone's going. Sue Johnson and what she's doing, like, and Porges, like those three plus Ellen. So those four, they're like the innovators of the space. They're like the Elon Musks and those types of people of this work. And the standard sort of therapeutic model looks at them and goes, oh man, they're way out there. And in about 5 seconds, they're going to be the most relevant people in mental health. So,
that's great. I'm definitely going to, other than Sue, I want to look those other ones up. I heard Sue on a podcast the other day, and she was talking about the data on the results that her therapist, I think they're called EFT.
EFT, emotional focused therapy, yep.
Yeah, she's like...
Which is not the same thing as tapping.
I know. It's confusing. Yeah. The tapping thing, the EFT, emotional, whatever, freedom technique. Yeah. But she was saying, oh yeah, our success rate is like 99%. Like people, our couples don't relapse, meaning they don't fall back into their old patterns or break up. I'm like, that's right. What?
Yep.
What couples therapy has those kind of results?
Well, when you take into context biological attachment of how human beings form relationships, and it's not just about stonewalling or sexual promiscuity being suppressed or something,
right?
And you actually get to like how we're wired and you make a secure attachment. That's the most important thing you could do in the world. you know?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, she's a total badass.
That's amazing.
And
dude.
I love her personality too, because she's like and she's at a place in her career where she doesn't care.
Totally.
She just says shit that's like the real shit.
Yeah,
you know?
and it's like her methodology's been proven.
Yeah.
And she's got the data. So it's like, she's like, whatever, this is my thing.
She's doing a training. Oh no, she just did. It was a couple weeks ago. She was doing a training here in LA.
Oh, no way. Oh man, I gotta get more of that.
Yeah, she's a badass.
Especially just at the time in my life right now. It's kind of, I'm on the precipice of a serious breakthrough in this area. So it's cool.
And for real, if you want an introduction to her, done, because she's on my faculty and stuff like that in terms of helping me with an institute we're putting together and stuff. So she's a total badass.
On it.
Yeah.
Love it, dude. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, man. This has been great, Luke. Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks, Mastin.
Wow, mind blown. I wish I had a little bank of sound effects here on my board so I could go mind blown. What a conversation. I told you guys in the intro, this was a very transformative episode. I'm hoping that it was as much so for you as it was for me. I am now officially trauma informed. Now, listen, I knew going into this interview with Mastin that my childhood screwed me up and that weird things happen, as do, and that I did some things to myself over the years that were harmful. And, that was kind of the root of any problems that I've had. But I don't know, he just made it so clear that this is the issue. Like, this is the problem for anyone that is acting wacky and being neurotic and having addictions and compulsions and trying to cope. We're all trying to cope. We all have different ways. Some of those ways can be very self-destructive. Some of those ways can be destructive unto others and the environment and the planet. And so if we can all become a bit more informed about our trauma and how to heal it at its core, we're going to spend a lot less time, I think, just spinning our wheels and going after the symptoms. All of the misbehaving that we humans do, I think, is really the symptom of the underlying trauma. And so this was just such a perfect timing for me to clue into this stuff. And Mastin, if you ever hear this outro, thank you so much for doing the show. Really, really great guy. And I truly enjoyed the time that we spent. I don't know why I'm talking to the guest when I should be talking to you, the listener. Let me talk to you. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. I'd love to invite you to support our sponsors, Onda Wellness. You can go to ondawellness.com and get the bomb-ass CBD, which might not heal your trauma, but it'll definitely calm down your nervous system that's freaking out over your trauma. So go to ondawellness.com, enter the code Luke15 and save 15% off. If you want to chill out and you want to sleep better, you need some blue blocking glasses. So go to blueblocks.com. That's BLUBLOX. Enter the code Lifestylist and save 15% off. No, seriously, the moment you put blue blocking lenses, at least the right kind of lenses, over your eyes, you know what happens? You start producing melatonin and you stop producing cortisol. Even during the day, you can use blue blockers to just calm down. It's crazy. It actually works. It's science, man. Then we've got Organifi, organifi.com /Luke. That's Organifi spelled with an I. And if you use the code again, Lifestylist at Organifi, you'll save 20%. This morning, my girlfriend said, well, you need to eat more salad, I think. You really don't eat enough greens. And I said, what are you talking about? I had 2 heaping tablespoons of Organifi this morning in my smoothie. And per usual, she cutely, adorably rolled her eyes and moved on and went and bought some kale and broccoli. Anywho, that's what's up. Listen, you can also find all of our sponsors at lukestory.com /store. So, it's great if you go to their sites directly. If you want to check out some of their stuff, it's a great way to support these amazing brands that fund this show. But you can also find them on my site, where you can find just about everything that I've ever used that is beneficial for your health. That's lukestory.com /store. I've got everything neatly categorized there. And the coolest thing about it for me is that I call it a store, but I don't sell anything. I just find the dopest stuff and I throw all the links up on my website along with some discount codes, which is awesome for you. So go check it out. Here's what you really need to check out, though. This is what's up. Next week's episodes, it's going to be a few of them, are called Welcome to the Jungle, my ayahuasca journey at Rhythmia. And it is quite a journey, folks. As I said in the intro, I carried my recorder with me down in the jungle as I went through not 1, not 2, not 3, but yes, 4 ayahuasca ceremonies.
it was heavy. I've just been going through the tracks that I recorded there, and it's like, I didn't record them on ayahuasca, but just around the whole experience. And it was so cool for me, even, in the third person, to sort of go back and listen to that. Now it's been a couple months later and go, wow, that was a heavy situation. And more than anything, what was awesome about the Rhythmia episodes and the whole experience in general was that really the whole purpose was to help heal trauma. And that's exactly what I got. And you're going to hear a play-by-play in excruciating detail if you tune into next week's very special episodes. Welcome to the jungle. Here's what I'd like you to do before we sign off. Ready? I'm going to give you some kind and compassionate instruction. Please, pretty please, with organic Beekeeper's Naturals honey dripped on top, share this episode with a friend. I always ask you to do this. You know why? Because it's really helpful to me. Of course, I want this podcast to be the biggest podcast ever for a number of different reasons. Some of them selfish, some of them not. And you can do, your part to help just by clicking share in the bottom right-hand corner of your app. At least that's where it is on my app. I use the Apple Podcast app. And click share and just text it to a friend and say, this is awesome. You need this. Check this out. This dude's interesting, if nothing else. Thank you so much for listening to the Lifestylist Podcast. I'll be back inside your brain, drilling some truth in there on Tuesday with Welcome to the Jungle, my ayahuasca journey at Rhythmia. Parts 1, 2, and maybe even 3. We'll see how it goes. This episode of the Lifestylist Podcast was produced by podcastmasters.net.